The story begins inside a massively popular VR game known as Zero Fantasy Online, or simply ZFO, where countless players are logged in at the same time. In the middle of this virtual world, a massive and terrifying monster lets out a deafening roar, shaking the surroundings, while a lone warrior stands firm in front of it, preparing for battle. That warrior is the main character, currently at level 998, standing on the edge of becoming the first player to ever reach the maximum level. In reality, the young man sits in front of his system, his fingers clicking rapidly on the mouse, completely focused with his VR headset on. He has been playing for nearly 200 hours straight, pushing himself far beyond what most would consider reasonable. In his mind, he tells himself that maybe this was a bit too much, but at the same time, he doesn't want to stop now. All he ever wanted was to achieve something, to leave his mark somewhere, because in real life he had never been good at studies or sports, never number one in anything. That frustration builds up inside him as he clenches his fist, thinking that if not in the real world, then at least here in ZFO, he could become the best. Back in the game, the monster charges forward with a devastating attack, its massive body shaking the ground. The knight, however, shows no fear and instead smiles, preparing the perfect counter. With precise timing, he leaps into the air, ready to deliver the final blow that would make him number one. But at that exact moment, a sharp pain strikes his chest in the real world. His eyes widen in shock, his breathing falters, and his vision begins to fade. A deep sense of regret fills him as he realizes he was just a step away from his goal. Then everything goes dark, and the message, "You died," appears on the screen as his body slumps forward, unconscious, never to wake again. The next moment, he finds himself opening his eyes in complete darkness, with only a faint light visible in the distance. As his vision slowly clears, he realizes he is no longer in front of his computer. Instead, he is standing in the middle of a forest, inside a body that doesn't feel quite like his own. Before he can process it fully, a desperate scream echoes nearby, someone shouting for a goblin to stop as it mercilessly attacks a man lying on the ground. The creature stomps him without hesitation, and the surrounding villagers begin to scatter in panic, running for their lives. The young man freezes for a moment, recognizing the goblin instantly. It looks exactly like the ones from ZFO. As he tries to make sense of the situation, a villager rushes forward with a pickaxe and strikes the goblin from behind, landing a hit on its head. But the attack barely does anything. The creature turns around, clearly annoyed, revealing itself as a level 7 fire goblin. The villager, only a level 1 farmer, is immediately overwhelmed by the difference in power and begins to tremble. At the same time, the young man notices something strange. He can actually feel his body, every movement, every sensation, as if this were real. That's when it finally clicks. He realizes that he has been reincarnated into the world of ZFO itself. With that thought, he quickly tries to check his status, and just like in the game, a blue screen appears before him, showing his name as Alan and his level as 1. A wave of disappointment hits him. Just moments ago, he had been so close to reaching the maximum level, and now he was back at the very beginning. Before he can dwell on it further, one of the villagers calls out to him, recognizing him as an adventurer and desperately asking for help. The man pleads with him to save them from the monster. Alan finds it strange that someone like an NPC is directly asking for his help, but that only confirms his suspicion. This world still follows the game's logic, including its storyline. He tells them to wait for a moment, explaining that he needs to set his class first. The villager looks shocked, saying that it's impossible for someone at level 1 to defeat that goblin. Alan doesn't disagree. Even he knows that under normal circumstances, this would be impossible. Still, he focuses on the class selection screen in front of him, scanning through the options carefully. Among the choices, one stands out: Crafter. It only has a single skill, and he remembers clearly that in the game, this class was considered the worst. Most players avoided it completely, but now things are different. This isn't just a game anymore. This is reality, and that means the rules can be used differently. With that thought, he selects the Crafter class without hesitation. A blue light surrounds his body as the selection is confirmed. Immediately, he decides to test his ability. Concentrating, he activates the skill called Craft, and an energy cube forms in his hand, shifting and reshaping rapidly. Within seconds, the cube stabilizes and transforms into something completely unexpected: an assault rifle, fully formed and ready to use. Alan looks at it with a satisfied smile, confirming that his plan worked exactly as he imagined. He remembers how, in his past life, he had spent countless hours studying, becoming knowledgeable about countless subjects, even understanding complex machines like fighter jets. That knowledge, combined with this ability, made the crafter class far more powerful than anyone had ever realized. The villagers stare at him in shock, unable to comprehend the strange weapon in his hands. None of them had ever seen anything like it before, and they begin to question what kind of class he had chosen. The young man quickly understood that even in this world, the crafter class was just as underestimated as it had been in the game. As more monsters began to appear, he calmly placed his finger on the trigger again and fired over the villagers' shoulders, making sure to protect them while aiming precisely at the incoming goblins. One by one, the smaller creatures were struck before they could even react, dropping instantly under the impact of the shots. The two villagers stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. A level 1 adventurer had just taken down monsters far stronger than himself with ease. Meanwhile, the young man casually blew on the tip of his weapon, realizing with satisfaction that he could recreate any modern weapon in this medieval world. That alone made him believe that the crafter class was actually the strongest of them all. The villagers, still confused, stared at him, wondering how something like this was even possible. Seeing their state, the young man decided to help them further. He told them that if they wanted to survive, they needed to fight for themselves. As he spoke, one of their weapons began to glow with a deep blue magical energy. When the two men took hold of the rifles, their expressions changed instantly, impressed by the power they could feel from them. They thanked him repeatedly, but one of them hesitated, worried about accidentally harming an ally. The young man shook his head and explained that there was no danger, as he had already placed a restriction on the weapons. To prove it, he raised his rifle and fired directly toward one of them. The bullet struck the man's arm but simply bounced off without causing any harm. The demonstration left them stunned, but it also filled them with confidence. With renewed courage, the villagers began firing at the monsters. The goblins, which had once seemed overwhelming, were now completely outmatched by the sheer firepower of the rifles. The young man watched quietly, a satisfied expression on his face as the situation quickly turned in their favor. Moments later, a blue screen appeared before him, showing that he had leveled up to level 2. It explained that experience was shared with the creator of the weapons, confirming his assumption that supporting others could also make him stronger. After the battle, one of the villagers handed him a glowing stone. As soon as he saw it, he recognized it as a magic stone dropped by a fire-type goblin. These stones contained the power of the monsters and could be sold at the Adventurers Guild, where their energy would be extracted for various purposes. Before he could think further, a loud scream broke the calm. One of the villagers pointed ahead in terror. A massive figure emerged from the distance, a giant goblin clad in armor carrying a heavy shield. The young man immediately recognized it as a boss-class monster. A screen appeared, identifying it as a level 13 goblin knight, far stronger than anything they had faced so far. Despite this, the villagers, now confident in their weapons, began firing at it. However, the bullets struck the shield and bounced off without leaving even a scratch. The goblin knight let out a mocking grin, clearly unbothered, as if the attacks were nothing more than a minor annoyance. The villagers' confidence shattered instantly. Their strongest attacks were useless. The young man quickly realized the problem. At his current level, the weapons he could create weren't powerful enough to deal with something like this. He didn't have much time to think, as the goblin knight suddenly charged forward, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The villagers panicked, shouting for him to run before he got killed. But instead of retreating, he gripped the magic stone tightly. A thought crossed his mind. If crafting allowed him to create items, could he also use materials like this stone directly? As the goblin swung its massive club toward him, he dodged at the last moment, focusing entirely on his ability. Deciding to test his theory, he activated his crafting skill while using the magic stone as a material. A bright blue light surrounded the stone, and its energy began to reshape rapidly. Within seconds, a new weapon formed in his hands, a heavy rocket launcher, far more powerful than anything he had created before. A small smile appeared on his face as he understood what had happened. By using the magic stone, the weapon had gained a special property and changed entirely, turning into a freaking bazooka and making it strong enough to deal with the goblin knight. Now the fight was already decided. Sometime later, while moving through the forest, a giant stone golem suddenly appeared in front of him. The young adventurer, now at level 13, had only come out to test his newly crafted weapons, but he hadn't expected to run into a level 20 monster so soon. Even so, he didn't hesitate. Raising his assault rifle, he began firing directly at the creature. The bullets struck the golem head-on, leaving small, smoking holes across its rocky body, but to his surprise, the damage meant nothing. In just a few moments, the stone giant regenerated completely, its body returning to perfect condition as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, the young man immediately understood the problem. The creature didn't just have overwhelming defense, it also had rapid regeneration. Continuing with normal physical attacks would lead nowhere. He steadied himself and began thinking of a new approach. With an idea forming, he activated his crafting ability again. A bright blue light surrounded him as a new item began to take shape in his hands. It formed into an attachment that fit perfectly onto his rifle, clearly designed to enhance its power. He quickly reasoned that if he could combine this with a magic stone, the weapon's strength could increase significantly. Without wasting time, he opened his inventory and took out a golem magic stone he had collected earlier. Carefully fitting the gem into the new slot, he prepared to test the result. The moment it connected, the stone began to glow intensely, releasing its energy. He watched closely as the power flowed through the weapon, transforming it. The rifle's appearance changed, taking on a rough, stone-like texture. With this change, the weapon now carried a piercing effect. The young man immediately realized what that meant. This power could bypass physical defenses entirely. Satisfied with the result, he turned his attention back to the golem. At that moment, the massive creature let out a deep roar and charged forward, raising its arm to crush him. The young man remained calm, lifting his upgraded weapon and locking his aim onto the target. Without hesitation, he fired. This time, the shots were completely different. The projectiles tore straight through the golem's body, ignoring its tough exterior and dealing real damage. He continued firing without pause, his focus unshaken. The stone giant began to crack and crumble under the relentless assault. Piece by piece, its body gave way until, finally, a massive explosion erupted and the creature collapsed completely. As the dust settled, a level-up notification appeared before him, pushing him to level 14. He let out a small breath, feeling satisfied with the result. Looking down at his weapon, he noticed that the magic stone used in the attachment had shattered after use. Without dwelling on it, he walked forward and picked up the new magic gem left behind by the golem. The moment he touched it, another notification appeared, raising him to level 15. At the same time, a message informed him that one of the villages he had helped had successfully defended themselves against a group of orcs. Over the past few days, he had traveled across multiple villages, distributing weapons so people could protect themselves. Because of that, he was now gaining experience even when he wasn't directly fighting. Far away, inside the massive headquarters of the Adventurers Guild, news of this began to spread. Someone mentioned that a rookie adventurer was leveling up at an unbelievable speed. A woman stood in front of a magic mirror, checking the information, and was visibly shocked. Two men nearby couldn't believe what they were seeing, nodding that someone had gone from level 4 to level 15 in just a few days. The mirror then revealed the adventurer's name, Alan. That alone was surprising, but what shocked them even more was his class. He was a crafter. One of the men mentioned that he had recorded the rookie's last battle through his familiar, and the image of Alan fighting the golem appeared before them. As they watched, silence fell across the room. The weapon in his hands was completely unfamiliar. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. They all knew how strong a stone golem's defense was, yet in the recording it was destroyed with ease. Someone finally spoke, pointing out that the attack power shown in the footage was comparable to that of a level 50 adventurer. That shouldn't have been possible. Crafted weapons were known to be weaker than standard ones, yet this completely contradicted everything they knew. In the end, they couldn't understand how it worked, but one thing was clear to all of them. The young man named Alan was operating on a completely different level. With that, a man wearing glasses decided that this matter was too unusual to ignore and thought it should be reported directly to the master. As he prepared to do so, the crystal ball shifted again, revealing that Alan had already entered another battle. This time, he was standing in the middle of a vast desert, facing a level 27 sandworm. The young man observed the massive creature calmly, thinking that it was the perfect opponent to test the limits of his creations. His thoughts moved quickly as he considered how to increase the firepower of smaller weapons using attachments. Recalling the golem magic stone he had just obtained, he decided to use it immediately. Activating his crafting ability, the stone began to transform in his hand, reshaping itself into a compact pistol. A notification appeared, indicating that the weapon had gained a 55% power boost from the fusion. He nodded in satisfaction, finding the result promising, but he wasn't done yet. He decided to push it further. Taking out another magic gem, he attached it as an additional accessory. The new component began to glow, releasing a faint blue light that spread across the weapon. The pistol's form changed slightly, now infused with an icy energy. With this modification, the weapon gained a freezing effect along with increased attack power. The young man smiled faintly, thinking that even if the shot itself wasn't enough, the freezing effect would handle the rest. As the sandworm surged forward through the desert, its massive body tearing through the sand, Alan raised his pistol and focused his aim. At this distance, there was no chance of missing. He pulled the trigger, and a single ice-infused projectile shot forward, striking the creature directly. The effect activated instantly. Frost spread rapidly across the worm's body, freezing everything it touched. Within seconds, a massive frozen cavity formed inside the sandworm. Alan watched closely, his expression serious as he analyzed the result. The upper portion of the monster became completely encased in ice. Then, without warning, cracks began to spread. The frozen structure shattered apart, and the creature's body broke into pieces, collapsing entirely. Looking down at his weapon, Alan felt satisfied. The fact that a simple pistol could defeat a boss of that level confirmed his belief even further. The crafter class in this world was far from weak. It was likely the strongest. After the fight, he walked forward and picked up the magic stone left behind by the defeated creature. Holding it in his hand, he decided it was time to return to the city and sell his collected items. Once he arrived at the Adventurers Guild, he headed straight to the exchange counter. As he placed his items down, the receptionist stared in shock at the sheer quantity. Trying to stay composed, she asked for his name. Alan calmly replied that his name was Alan. The moment she heard it, her expression changed completely. She recognized the name instantly and realized that the famous rookie was standing right in front of her. Flustered, she asked him to wait for a moment before quickly running off. Alan stood there, confused, wondering why everyone was suddenly making such a big deal out of it. Before he could figure it out, he heard hurried footsteps approaching. Turning his head, he saw a group of knights moving toward him. In seconds, they surrounded him, drawing the attention of everyone inside the guild. The leader stepped forward and declared that Alan was under suspicion for a serious matter. Alan frowned, clearly annoyed and confused, asking what they were talking about. But before he could get a proper answer, magic chains suddenly appeared out of nowhere and wrapped tightly around his body, restraining him completely. The soldier informed him that he would be taken to the guild headquarters immediately. Hearing this, Alan's expression hardened. The entire situation made no sense to him, and the lack of explanation only made him more irritated. At the guild headquarters, Alan was taken into a large meeting room where the atmosphere felt far more serious than anything he had experienced so far. As soon as they entered, a man ordered the knights to release him, and the magic chains disappeared instantly. The man then apologized for the sudden treatment, explaining that there was no ill intent and that they had simply been curious about his rapid rise in level. He added that the guild master felt it was necessary to meet the rookie personally. Alan, still irritated, responded with a sarcastic tone, asking what exactly they wanted from him. One of the guild members stepped forward and asked him to explain the weapon he was using. Alan dismissed the request, saying they wouldn't understand it anyway since it was based on knowledge from another world. Hearing this, another person scoffed and mocked him, saying he was talking too big for someone who was just a crafter, and questioned whether his weapon was really that special. Alan quickly realized they were trying to provoke him into revealing information, so instead of responding directly, he shifted the topic and said that his goal was to become the first person to reach level 999. This answer caught the guild leader off guard, and he asked Alan to wait, then questioned whether his ultimate aim was to defeat the Demon King. Alan confirmed it without hesitation, adding that doing so would also benefit the guild since the Demon King's army was becoming a serious threat. The master nodded and explained that humanity was currently facing an unprecedented crisis, even mentioning that an important city had recently been destroyed. Alan responded casually that he would deal with it eventually, but next time they should make an appointment instead of dragging him in like this. Just as he turned to leave, the guild leader stopped him again and suggested that if he wanted to level up faster, he should consider joining a clan. He explained how clans worked and even offered to introduce him to a high-ranking A-rank clan. Before Alan could respond, another guild member interrupted, arguing that the suggestion was premature and insisting that his own clan would be a better fit, claiming they specialized in high-level dungeons. Soon, the entire room descended into an argument, with multiple members competing over who would recruit Alan. Watching this, Alan lost interest and cut them off, saying he had no intention of joining any clan. The room fell quiet, and though disappointed, they told him to inform them if he ever changed his mind. Alan simply said goodbye and walked out. After he left, the guild members commented on how difficult he was to deal with, while examining one of his weapons and wondering how a crafter could produce something like that. Eventually, they decided to call in the best blacksmiths in the country to analyze it. Elsewhere, at a rocky mountain filled with activity, the entrance to the Wolf Mine dungeon was crowded with adventurers. Alan walked through the area, noticing how busy it was. A man approached him and asked if he wanted to join a party, but the moment he saw Alan's level, he froze in surprise. He quickly apologized and backed off, muttering that a level 15 rookie had no place in a level 25 dungeon. Alan didn't take it personally. He knew he was there because of the level difference bonus, a system that rewarded players with more experience for fighting stronger enemies. As he moved forward, a sudden scream caught his attention. Turning toward the noise, he saw a group of men surrounding a young woman, trying to force her to join them. The leader, a swordsman named Lucas, was pressuring her aggressively, insisting that she should take advantage of the opportunity. The nearby adventurers whispered among themselves, mentioning that Lucas was known for forcing women into his party, and that no one dared to oppose him because of his high level. The girl, a priestess named Emma, firmly refused, saying she only wanted to join a party with people at her own level. Lucas dismissed her words, and his group began smiling in a disturbing way, clearly intending to push things further. Before the situation could escalate, a blue aura suddenly appeared around Lucas, confusing him. In the next instant, a bolt of lightning struck him, sending a powerful shock through his body. At the same time, a bronze statue shaped like a hand performing a strange pose rose from the ground and struck him, knocking him flat. Alan stepped forward calmly, apologizing as if nothing unusual had happened, explaining that his creation ability had misfired and that it was difficult to control. Lucas, groaning on the ground, didn't believe a word of it. Furious, he got up and threatened Alan, demanding to know how he dared to attack him. Alan replied casually that he was just testing his ability and that Lucas had simply been in the right place at the wrong time. The response only made Lucas angrier, and he drew his sword, preparing to attack. But when he took a closer look and saw Alan's level, he hesitated. His companions immediately began mocking him, saying it would be embarrassing to fight a low-level rookie. Lucas clicked his tongue in annoyance and said it wasn't worth his time to deal with someone like that, deciding to let him go. Emma thanked Alan for stepping in, and the two began to walk away. Alan shrugged it off, saying it wasn't really a heroic act. But before they could leave, Lucas shouted after them, saying the matter wasn't over yet. He claimed that sparing Alan's life didn't mean he would let him leave freely. Alan turned back, asking what he intended to do. Lucas pointed toward the dungeon and proposed a competition. They would race to clear it, and whoever finished first would win. If Lucas won, he declared that he would beat Alan until nothing was left. Emma protested immediately, saying it wasn't fair because of the level difference. But Lucas ignored her and added another condition. If he won, he would claim the girl as his reward. Emma froze in fear at the proposal. Alan, however, accepted the challenge without hesitation, saying that if he won, he didn't really need any reward. Lucas smirked, convinced that there was no way Alan could win. Meanwhile, Alan ran a hand through his hair, thinking quietly that a reward from someone like Lucas didn't hold any value anyway. Hearing this, Lucas clenched his teeth in rage, convinced that the rookie was nothing more than an arrogant fool who didn't understand his place. In front of the dungeon entrance, the priestess tried to stop him, warning that the place was far too dangerous for someone at his level. She reminded him that the recommended level was 25 while he was only level 15, but Alan brushed it off, saying it wasn't a problem since he had already planned to hunt there anyway. As they moved closer, the swordsman called out, asking if he really intended to go in alone, then mockingly suggested that he at least recruit some low-level players to form a party. Alan shot back without hesitation, implying that someone at level 65 couldn't even function without his group, which immediately irritated the swordsman. Ignoring him after that, Alan acted as if none of it mattered, but before he could proceed, the girl suddenly ran up to him and offered to join. A party invitation screen appeared in front of him, and he paused for a moment before declining it outright, leaving her stunned. She didn't give up and insisted on coming along, saying she felt responsible and couldn't let him enter alone. Alan found her persistence annoying, thinking she was unnecessarily stubborn, but after a brief hesitation, he sighed and accepted the request. As soon as he tapped the screen, the invitation was confirmed, and the girl smiled brightly, thanking him repeatedly for allowing her to help. From behind them, the swordsman shouted sarcastically, telling Alan not to get the girl killed inside, while his group smirked, clearly planning to cause trouble later. The comment made the priestess uncomfortable, but Alan ignored them and moved forward, placing his hand on the dungeon portal. At the entrance, a panel displayed the fastest clear time, 19 minutes. Alan glanced at it confidently, thinking that with his current strength, beating it would be easy. Without wasting time, the two stepped into the portal, beginning the time trial. Inside, they were immediately greeted by a large number of monsters. Bats filled the air, caterpillar-like creatures crawled across the ground, and undead warriors advanced toward them. The girl hesitated, worried about both the number and the level of the enemies, but Alan dismissed them as nothing more than weak mobs. He told her to put her staff away since it would only get in the way, and reminded her that now that she had joined the party, she would have to fight as well. Activating his ability, a blue aura surrounded them, and in the next moment, 2 submachine guns appeared in her hands. She froze, startled by the unfamiliar weapons, while Alan calmly explained that only he could create them. He told her that using them was simple. She just needed to aim and pull the trigger with focus. Without waiting further, he began firing, taking down several monsters instantly. Seeing this, the girl snapped out of her daze and started shooting as well, but the recoil was so strong that she lost control of her aim. Alan explained that he had designed it that way on purpose so she would hit multiple targets. Then he cut the conversation short, saying there was no time to waste and that they were heading straight to the boss. Elsewhere in the dungeon, the swordsman and his group were also fighting. After clearing a wave of monsters, they paused to rest. One of his companions remarked that he had been unnecessarily harsh on the rookie, but the swordsman revealed the real reason behind his actions. He explained that the dungeon summoned an extra boss on a player's first attempt, and that was why he had provoked Alan. He was confident that the rookie wouldn't even make it past the early stages, and even if he somehow reached the boss, he would definitely fail. Remembering how he had been embarrassed earlier only made him more determined to see Alan fail. Meanwhile, Alan and the priestess arrived at the boss room far faster than expected. Alan noticed that not even 10 minutes had passed, while the girl was still in shock at the speed. He casually complained that they could have finished in half the time if she hadn't triggered traps or gotten stuck earlier. She apologized, explaining that it was her first time in a dungeon. During this time, Alan leveled up 3 times, reaching level 18, while she only gained 1 level. He immediately realized how significant the bonus from assisting others was. The girl snapped him out of his thoughts, reminding him that they needed to focus or they would lose the bet. Both of them prepared themselves and pushed open the boss room door. Inside, a heavy purple aura filled the space, creating a suffocating atmosphere. The priestess looked ahead and froze in fear. 2 powerful presences stood before them, one radiating purple energy and the other yellow. Alan quickly recognized them. A werewolf queen at level 25 and a werewolf king at level 25. He remembered that this dungeon had an extra boss mechanic, while the girl complained that he hadn't warned her earlier. Before they could react further, the 2 monsters clashed with each other briefly before suddenly turning their attention toward the adventurers and charging forward. Alan analyzed the situation instantly, realizing that werewolves were extremely fast and difficult to hit with firearms. He told the priestess to provide covering fire so he could think of a solution. She did as told, firing both submachine guns, but the creatures easily dodged every shot with incredible speed. Seeing her attacks fail, she began to panic. Alan frowned slightly, noticing that the enemies had split up. He quickly instructed her to handle the queen while he would deal with the king. However, even his shots were missing as the creature evaded them effortlessly. The priestess couldn't believe that they were dodging everything. At that moment, the queen suddenly lunged toward her, claws aimed for a finishing blow. She screamed, unable to react in time. But Alan remained calm, already having predicted the move. Just as the attack was about to land, he activated his creation skill. In the middle of the battle, blue energy circles suddenly appeared beneath the hands and feet of both werewolves. Alan's expression turned serious as he calmly gave the command to capture them. In the next instant, magical bear traps materialized and snapped shut, locking both creatures firmly in place. The werewolves howled in pain, struggling violently, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't move. Emma stared in disbelief, wondering if they had really been stopped just like that. Alan replied that he only needed her to buy him a little time. She was amazed, realizing she had no idea his ability could be used in such a way. Meanwhile, Alan felt satisfied that his earlier testing with ranged creation had paid off. With the monsters restrained, he walked forward to finish the fight. As he approached, he created a pistol in his hand and casually remarked that a werewolf that couldn't dodge was no different from a normal mob. The werewolf king struggled desperately, trying to break free, but the trap held it in place completely. Alan raised his weapon, aiming directly at the immobilized creature. With a cold and steady gaze, he silently ended the fight with a final shot. After the monster was defeated, a purple crystal dropped from its body. Alan picked it up and then turned toward Emma. At that moment, she ran over, slightly out of breath, explaining that she had also managed to defeat the queen. Right after that, a system screen appeared, announcing that they had broken the dungeon's record. Alan simply noted that the job was done and that it was time to head back. As they stepped out of the portal, the villagers gathered around them, expressing their gratitude. Emma asked about the weapons, and Alan casually told her she could keep them. Not far away, the swordsman's group noticed the two of them and were surprised that only 10 minutes had passed. They assumed Alan and Emma had given up and come out early to avoid facing them. Hearing this, Alan asked what they were talking about and calmly said that they had already finished, a faint mocking smile on his face. The others immediately dismissed it, saying he should stop joking. Alan then suggested they check the crystal, since a new record had been set. One of the men scoffed, saying it wasn't funny and adding that someone with such a low level and a useless class couldn't possibly achieve something like that. Still smiling, Alan gestured toward the crystal. The man touched it to prove him wrong, but the moment he saw the result, his expression froze in shock. The record displayed was 9 minutes and 48 seconds. One of them dropped to the ground in disbelief, while another stood there unable to understand how it was even possible. Alan, surrounded by a faint blue aura, calmly said he would give them a small tip. Activating his skill, he created several weapons right in front of them. One of the adventurers picked one up, staring at it in confusion, wondering what kind of equipment it was. A screen appeared, showing its attack power, 153, far beyond what they expected. Emma smiled and explained that the weapon was actually very simple to use. All they had to do was aim at the enemy and pull the trigger. To demonstrate, she fired a few shots, and the group was instantly impressed by the overwhelming power. One of the adventurers turned to Alan, trying to ask who he really was. But before he could finish speaking, Alan had already disappeared from their sight. Meanwhile, a crowd began gathering around the weapons, examining them with excitement, while Alan quietly walked away. In his mind, staying there any longer would have been a waste of time. Without looking back, he left the place behind. Amid the crowd, a white-haired girl stood quietly, her gaze fixed on Alan as he walked away. There was a clear sense of curiosity in her eyes, not just toward him, but toward the strange power he possessed, the ability to create weapons that no one else seemed to understand. A few minutes later, Lucas and his group finally emerged from the dungeon. Stretching his shoulders, he proudly declared that they had nearly broken the 50-minute mark, clearly satisfied with their performance. The group settled down nearby, waiting with smug expressions, convinced that the rookies would soon crawl out defeated. Some of them laughed, saying there was no way the two could have survived inside. Just then, another adventurer approached and spoke to Lucas, mentioning casually that the two he was waiting for had already left. Lucas frowned immediately, assuming they must have run away out of fear. His companions laughed at the thought, joking that their leader had scared them off without even needing to fight. But the man shook his head, explaining that things hadn't gone the way they thought. Lucas grew impatient and asked what he meant, insisting there was no way anyone could be faster than his team. The man replied that it wasn't just about being faster, they had broken the dungeon record. For a moment, Lucas didn't react as if he hadn't heard it properly. Then his expression changed completely. He rushed toward the dungeon crystal, muttering that such a thing was impossible. Without trusting anyone's words, he placed his hand on the crystal to see it for himself. The panel lit up and displayed the new record, 9 minutes and 48 seconds. The number froze him in place. He remembered clearly that his own team had taken nearly an hour to clear the dungeon. One of his companions called out, asking if he was all right, but Lucas couldn't process it. His mind rejected the reality in front of him. Suddenly he dropped to the ground, shouting that it couldn't be true, that there was no way he had lost to them. Far away from the noise of the guild, inside a quiet office, a mysterious man sat reviewing documents spread across his desk. His expression remained calm as he examined a report detailing Alan's recent achievements, including the new dungeon record at the Wolf Mine. After reading through everything, he leaned back slightly, concluding that this young adventurer was exactly the kind of person they had been looking for. At that moment, the door opened, and a hooded mercenary stepped inside, waiting silently for instructions. The man behind the desk asked if he had received the earlier request. The mercenary nodded, confirming that the message from his employer had reached him. The mysterious figure then slid the report forward, pointing to Alan's image. The mercenary studied the photo briefly and remarked that the target didn't look easy to deal with. In response, the man tossed a heavy bag of coins onto the table, stating that the reward would be more than enough to make it worthwhile. The mercenary tapped the image lightly, signaling that he understood. Without any hesitation, the man gave the final order. Alan was to be eliminated. Somewhere else, the priestess thanked the young man sincerely for everything he had done for her. Alan asked if she really needed to leave like that and even offered to help her further, but she shook her head, explaining that as an adventurer, she couldn't keep relying on him forever. Hearing that, Alan understood her decision and simply said goodbye. Before leaving, she turned back and told him not to break any more records because she wanted her own name to stand in history too. Then, with a small smile, she added that they should meet again someday before leaving the party. A few days later, Alan arrived at a deserted area to test his abilities more seriously. Standing alone in the open land, he activated his creation skill and focused carefully, hoping his idea would work. Moments later, a massive battle tank appeared before him, its exterior perfectly formed. He climbed inside to check the controls and found that everything had been recreated exactly as he remembered. With a satisfied smile, he tried to move the vehicle, but nothing happened. After a moment, he realized the problem. It needed fuel. His ability allowed him to create anything as long as he understood its structure, but it didn't provide things like energy, water, or electricity. Still, this didn't surprise him. He had already thought about it. Reaching toward the tank's internal system, he remembered that in this world, magic stones acted as a power source. If that was the case, then he could use them to run his creations. As soon as he connected a magic stone to the system, the tank responded. Its treads began to move, and soon it surged forward across the desert at high speed. Watching the machine work exactly as intended, Alan couldn't help but feel pleased with the result. The test had been a success. However, not long after, the tank suddenly came to a halt. Alan stepped out and saw that the magic stone inside had shattered completely, its energy consumed in an instant. That made him realize that while the concept worked, he still didn't have enough power to sustain something that large. He would need much stronger magic stones. Even so, he considered the test a success and decided to try something smaller. Activating his skill again, he created a compact drone in front of him. Placing a magic stone into its compartment, he powered it on. The drone lifted smoothly into the air, responding to his commands without delay. Alan watched closely, wondering how long it would last. He directed it to fly higher and record the surrounding desert, smiling slightly as he judged its performance to be more than acceptable. As he observed it, a new thought crossed his mind. If he replaced the camera with a weapon, the drone itself could become a combat tool. Curious, he pulled out a tablet to review the footage being recorded. The quality was better than he expected, but as he continued watching, something caught his attention. He paused the video. There were figures in the distance. A group of people was watching him. Alan narrowed his eyes, immediately sensing their intent. The hostility was clear. He remembered the group from the mine and realized these people weren't here by coincidence. Not liking the situation, he decided not to waste time. Raising his voice, he called out directly, telling the 5 people hiding among the rocks to come out. In the distance, the mercenary stiffened. One of them warned the leader that the target had noticed them. Another doubted it, saying their stealth skills should have made them impossible to detect. But Alan's voice came again, sharp and certain, confirming their position. The group exchanged glances. One of them asked what they should do now that they had been exposed. Another seemed uneasy, mentioning the speed of Alan's weapon, but the leader dismissed the concern, saying that such weapons shouldn't be able to harm humans anyway. Alan responded immediately, saying they had misunderstood the situation completely. The leader's expression hardened, and he told his men to stay alert because the target was clearly dangerous. Alan, growing impatient, said he didn't enjoy playing hide and seek and told them to show themselves. After a brief pause, the leader stepped forward, admitting they had been caught off guard. One by one, the 5 mercenaries revealed themselves and stood in front of Alan. He looked at them calmly and asked what they were doing in the desert. The leader told him to stop staring like that and revealed their purpose plainly. They were here to eliminate him. The moment those words were spoken, the 5 figures vanished from sight. Alan immediately understood that they were using high-level stealth techniques. Still, he didn't panic. Instead, he felt fortunate that he had prepared a weapon capable of rapid fire. Suddenly, one of the mercenaries appeared right in front of him, mocking him for relying on a weapon that supposedly couldn't harm him. But before he could finish, a shot rang out and the man was struck, his expression turning to shock. Alan didn't hesitate. He began firing continuously, his focus unwavering. Bullets tore through the air, striking the hidden enemies who had been completely unprepared for such an attack. One after another, they were hit and brought down within seconds. As the last of them fell, Alan lowered his weapon slightly and remarked that challenging someone who was already armed like this had been a terrible decision. He added that if they were going to try something like this, they should have at least come up with a better plan. The young man quickly understood why the mercenaries had attacked him so directly, but the leader, struggling on the ground, couldn't make sense of it. Alan calmly explained that his weapons normally had a safety restriction placed on them, but since the group had looked suspicious from the start, he had removed that restriction before the fight. Almost as if to prove his point, another shot landed, and the leader's body jerked before collapsing completely, unable to react. Alan stepped closer and warned that once the safety was turned off, anyone hit by his weapon wouldn't survive. The mercenary leader, now kneeling weakly on the ground, had clearly lost the will to resist. Alan raised his weapon and pointed it directly at the man's head, his voice steady as he demanded to know why he had been targeted and ordered him to tell the truth. The mercenary gave a faint, bitter response, explaining that they were simply hired to eliminate whoever was marked as a target. Alan frowned slightly and asked who the client was, since he couldn't recall making any enemies. The man let out a weak laugh and said that sometimes a target didn't need to do anything wrong. He added that Alan had simply become too strong, and someone powerful didn't like that at all. Alan tried to press him further, asking what he meant, but before he could get a clear answer, the mercenary suddenly bit down on something hidden in his mouth. A faint smile appeared on his face as he admitted that he was a professional and couldn't say anything more. Moments later, his body went limp, collapsing lifelessly onto the desert floor. Alan looked down at the corpse and quickly realized what had happened. The man had taken poison to silence himself. He stepped back slightly, his thoughts turning inward. Being called strong felt strange to him, especially when he was only at level 24. Just then, a voice echoed from nearby, praising him for turning the situation around so effortlessly against a group of experienced mercenaries. Alan immediately turned toward the direction of the sound, his expression sharpening as he asked who was there and whether they were part of the same group. From atop a nearby rock, a girl began to climb down, her movements calm and unhurried. She spoke casually, almost as if amused, saying he had to be joking if he thought she was one of them. With her arms crossed, she stated that she was actually on his side. Even so, Alan didn't relax. He stared at her with a serious and suspicious gaze, unable to trust her words so easily. In his mind, something didn't add up. He knew he had grown stronger, but at his current level, he doubted someone like her would be wary of him without reason. The girl, wearing red boots, stepped closer and repeated that she wasn't his enemy, her tone confident as she insisted she was here to help him. But Alan remained still, watching her carefully, unwilling to lower his guard. The girl suggested that they should team up, saying it would be a good deal for both of them, but Alan rejected the idea immediately, stating that he didn't need companions now or in the future. As he said that, a brief thought of the priestess crossed his mind, making him admit to himself that there might be one exception, but he didn't say it out loud. The girl sighed and asked him not to be so defensive, telling him to at least listen before deciding. She then revealed that she had an idea about who might have hired the mercenaries. That caught Alan's attention. He turned to her and asked who it was, but before that, he wanted to confirm something. The girl nodded, saying that he was Alan, the one who had broken the record at the Wolf Mine. Alan explained that he had asked because his stats were normally hidden. He opened his menu and mentioned that fame was annoying, so he had changed the settings. With that, he made his stats visible and asked if she could see them now. The girl's expression changed immediately when she saw the number. She was clearly shocked to realize that his level was only 24. From the way he fought earlier, she had assumed he was at least level 80. Alan then told her to show her stats as well, saying it would only be fair. A screen appeared, revealing that the sorceress Melissa was at level 50. Seeing that, Alan got straight to the point and asked again who had hired the mercenaries. Melissa smiled slightly and said that information like that wasn't something she would give away for free. Alan's expression hardened as he realized what she wanted. She confirmed it without hesitation and said that if he helped her, she would tell him everything she knew. Alan thought about it briefly, wondering what kind of help she needed. Instead of answering directly, Melissa casually tossed a small stone into the air, making him even more confused. Then she explained that she wanted his help to reach the Crystal Sky Castle, a level 50 dungeon. She warned him that it wasn't a normal place. Its difficulty was extremely high, with monsters and bosses appearing randomly, and traps everywhere that could catch even experienced adventurers off guard. At the deepest part of the dungeon was the Crystal Dragon, a boss far stronger than anything else inside. Alan asked if what she wanted was help clearing that dungeon. Melissa nodded and added that in return, she wanted the Jade Dragon Orb that dropped from the boss. Alan immediately understood that the orb was a top-tier material, especially valuable for someone at her level. She then asked him directly whether he would accept the deal. She admitted that she hadn't expected much, since someone at his level shouldn't be able to handle that dungeon. However, Alan accepted the offer without hesitation. Melissa froze for a moment, clearly surprised by how quickly he agreed, then asked in annoyance if he had actually listened to what she said. She reminded him that the recommended level was 50 and that the place was extremely dangerous. Alan replied casually that he was fully aware of that and probably knew more about the dungeon than she did. In his mind, he recalled having cleared it multiple times before. More importantly, he needed to deal with whoever was targeting him, and this was the best lead he had. Melissa didn't argue further. As long as he agreed to the deal, she didn't care about his reasons. She raised her hand slightly, preparing to seal the agreement with him, but just as Alan said they should leave immediately, she stopped him with an annoyed look. She explained that they couldn't go yet. Alan turned toward her and asked why. Melissa replied that there were two problems, and the first was simply getting to the castle. She said they needed to go through a teleportation ritual, which confused him. He remembered that in the game, reaching that location only required speaking to an NPC. Melissa then pointed out the issue. He didn't meet the requirements for the ritual. A system panel appeared, showing that the minimum level required was 40, which meant Alan was currently ineligible. He asked why she had invited him in the first place, and she admitted that she wouldn't have asked if she had known his level beforehand. Alan didn't dwell on it and instead asked about the second problem. Melissa answered plainly that it was obvious. Just the two of them weren't enough to complete the mission. Melissa explained calmly that if they really wanted to challenge the dungeon, they would need a proper formation. Someone had to take the role of a tank to withstand the enemy attacks, and they would also need a strong attacker capable of dealing heavy single-target damage. She added that as a sorceress, her abilities were mostly area-based and not suited for focusing down a single powerful boss. Because of that, she said his priority right now should be leveling up, and since she wasn't in a hurry, they could take their time. Hearing that, Alan pointed out that it was actually a problem because he was in a hurry. When she asked why, he answered without hesitation, his voice firm as he said he intended to become the first person to reach level 999. There was no room for delay in his plan, and wasting time on unnecessary steps wasn't something he was willing to do. Melissa sighed slightly and told him that having ambitions was fine, but the reality wouldn't change. The only way forward was to reach level 40 and meet the teleportation requirements. Alan didn't argue with that part and admitted that the level restriction was definitely a problem. He then looked up at the floating castle in the sky, thinking to himself that even flight magic wouldn't be enough to reach it directly. After a moment of silence, his expression shifted as if something clicked in his mind. He said that maybe they didn't need the ritual at all. Melissa frowned, clearly not understanding what he meant. Instead of explaining immediately, Alan activated his skill and said he would show her, but first he needed to test something. A small drone appeared in front of them. Melissa looked at it with curiosity and asked how it worked. Alan simply explained that it was a kind of magic drone, something from another world. Without further delay, he crossed his arms and gave the command for it to fly toward the castle in the sky. The drone responded instantly, rising higher and higher. Melissa watched it with growing interest, while Alan kept his eyes fixed on it, carefully observing. In his mind, he was checking for one important thing, whether there was any kind of barrier surrounding the castle. The drone continued its ascent without interruption. It moved steadily through the air, getting closer to the floating structure. Alan remained completely focused, waiting for the result of his test. Finally, the drone reached the castle and landed successfully. Seeing that, Alan confirmed that there was no barrier preventing access. Melissa was visibly shocked, unable to believe that reaching the castle without the ritual was actually possible. Excited, she suggested that he could just create a large drone to carry them both and that they should head back to the city to prepare. Alan rejected the idea immediately. He said that just the two of them were already enough for the mission. Melissa frowned again, confused, reminding him that they still needed other roles like a tank and a damage dealer. Alan dismissed the concern, saying that he could handle it alone if needed, which only made her wonder where his confidence came from. He then added that building a giant drone wasn't an option anyway. The larger the creation, the worse its efficiency with magic fuel. A big vehicle wouldn't last long enough to reach the destination and would likely fail midway. Looking at her seriously, he asked her to focus on the real question, how they were actually going to reach the dungeon. When Melissa asked again about his plan, Alan replied calmly that they would use a completely different power source instead of relying on magic stones. Melissa looked at him in surprise and asked what kind of power source he was talking about. Alan turned toward her with a confident expression and a small smile, then casually revealed that she would be the power source. For a moment, she didn't react, trying to process what he meant, but he explained it simply. Since she was a sorceress, she could generate magic, and instead of relying on stones, they would use her magic directly. Before she could question it further, Alan activated his skill and told her to just watch. A moment later, a hot air balloon appeared in front of them. He pointed at it and said that they were going to fly using this. Then he told her to get in so they could test it properly. Still slightly confused, Melissa stepped into the basket and asked what exactly she needed to do. Alan replied calmly that she just needed to fill the balloon with wind. Without arguing, she raised her hand and used her wind magic, sending a steady stream of air into the balloon. The large structure began to inflate quickly under her control. Once it was filled, Alan told her that the next step was to heat the air inside. He explained that anything capable of generating heat would work, but using her flame ability would be more efficient. Nodding, she activated her skill, and a small flame formed in her hand. With focus, she directed the heat upward, and almost immediately the basket began to lift from the ground. Melissa was startled by the sudden movement, but Alan explained that it was simply due to the difference in air density. He reminded her not to let the flame go out, while she complained that he could have explained everything earlier. Alan brushed it off, saying it wasn't an issue since he would handle anything dangerous once they reached the dungeon. She glanced at him, still slightly doubtful, especially considering he was only level 24. But as the balloon continued to rise higher into the sky, she found herself starting to believe in him. With a determined look, she thought that with him, they might actually be able to clear the dungeon. After a long journey through the sky, they finally reached the entrance of the floating castle. Alan stepped out and praised the result of their plan, while Melissa downplayed it, saying it wasn't anything special. Once inside, Alan noticed that several other adventurer groups were already there. Melissa explained that if another party cleared the dungeon first, they would have to start over from the beginning. Hearing that, Alan immediately said they needed to hurry. He made it clear that he had no intention of letting anyone else take the orb. He added that they should ignore weaker monsters and focus only on what mattered. As they moved forward, Melissa started explaining that the dungeon had 3 floors to clear, but Alan cut her off midway, stating that they would need 3 crystals to proceed to the next stage. He said it casually, even adding that he would explain how he knew that, but not for free. Melissa shot him an annoyed look, clearly irritated by his attitude, but before she could say anything, both of them suddenly stopped. Ahead of them, another group of adventurers had already reached the first boss. The creature standing there was an Acer at level 45, far stronger than anything they had faced so far. Melissa suggested that they should skip this floor since there were multiple layers in the dungeon anyway, but Alan refused immediately. He didn't want to give up the crystal from this floor. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward the group and told them to move aside if they weren't going to fight. His tone was calm but direct, arms crossed as he waited. One of the adventurers got irritated by his attitude, but the moment they checked his level, they burst into laughter, mocking him openly. Amused, they stepped aside and told him to go ahead, saying the boss was all his. Alan simply thanked them and stepped forward alone. Standing in front of the massive creature, he showed no fear at all. Behind him, Melissa called out, warning that her mana hadn't fully recovered yet. Alan replied that it didn't matter. Then, without hesitation, he took out a sandworm magic stone and prepared for the fight. Without wasting a second, Alan activated his creation skill again in the middle of the battle. A massive rocket launcher formed in his hands, its interface showing a power value of 14,500. Melissa quickly calculated in her head, realizing that with the additional bonuses, the total attack power easily exceeded 30,000. The Minotaur-like boss raised its axe and let out a heavy roar, preparing to strike, but Alan had already taken aim at its head. With a calm and cold expression, he stated that the battle was already over for the creature. Before anyone could react, he pulled the trigger. The rocket shot forward at incredible speed and struck the monster directly in the face. A massive explosion erupted, filling the entire room with blinding light. The shockwave spread violently, forcing Melissa to shield herself with her arms, while the other adventurers were thrown backward by the impact. When the dust began to settle, a system message appeared, announcing that the boss had been defeated. Alan's level rose to 25, and the surrounding adventurers could only stare in disbelief at what had just happened. Melissa was left speechless for a moment before praising him, asking how he had managed to end the fight so easily. Alan, thinking about it, felt that he might not have even needed the magic stone for that battle. After collecting the crystal dropped by the boss, he noted that 2 more were needed to advance further. He also picked up the Minotaur's magic stone, while Melissa casually said she didn't mind. Without stopping, the 2 of them moved toward the next area. As they ran, Melissa couldn't help but wonder how a class that was considered useless could defeat a boss like that so easily. Soon, they entered the next room and found a long hallway with a deep abyss in the middle. Alan explained that to obtain the remaining crystals, they needed to cross it. Melissa looked ahead, noting that the path seemed completely cut off and wondered how they were supposed to get across. Alan shook his head and corrected her, saying the path wasn't actually broken. He pointed out that the floor was transparent and that there was a hidden bridge connecting the 2 sides. Melissa felt a slight chill hearing that, though she tried not to show it. Nearby, one of the other adventurers decided to test his luck. He stepped forward carefully, but the moment he placed his foot in the wrong spot, a trap was triggered. A sharp sound echoed through the room, and in the next instant, he fell straight into the darkness below, disappearing completely. Watching that, Alan commented that this was exactly what happened when someone stepped in the wrong place. He considered the usual method, using a staff or weapon to probe the ground step by step, but dismissed it immediately. If he did that, the other adventurers would simply follow the same path. Melissa then suggested that he could just use his ability to build a bridge across. Alan shook his head again, explaining that if it were that simple, everyone would already be flying across using magic. Then he told her to try using her own magic as a test. Melissa focused for a moment but quickly realized that she couldn't use her abilities properly in that area. Alan nodded, saying that her skills were being restricted by the dungeon. Seeing her confusion, he smiled slightly and said there was another way to get across. Melissa stared at him, curiosity clearly written on her face, waiting to see what he would do next. Alan calmly explained that even though his creation ability was restricted in certain ways, his inventory was still fully functional. As he said that, a pair of night vision goggles appeared in his hand. He mentioned that he had come prepared for situations like this and handed them over to Melissa. She looked at the strange equipment and asked what it was supposed to do. Alan explained that the goggles were crafted using materials from bat-type monsters and allowed him to see things that were normally invisible. Hearing that, she was genuinely surprised and asked when he had even made something like that. Alan replied casually that he had crafted it while she was distracted during the hot air balloon ride. That answer impressed her even more. He then explained that the device worked by detecting infrared signatures, making hidden paths and invisible surfaces visible through the lens. With the goggles on, Alan could clearly see the safe path across the abyss. He told her they could move forward now, and she praised him for being so well prepared. But before she could react further, Alan suddenly lifted her into his arms. She was caught completely off guard and instinctively tensed up, but he simply said that he was saving time. As he started running, she let out a startled scream and clung to him tightly. Alan warned her not to talk too much or she might bite her own tongue from the speed. Carrying her effortlessly, he ran across the invisible path at high speed. The other adventurers could only stare in shock, watching him move across what looked like empty air. Melissa kept asking him to slow down, her voice filled with panic, but in just a few seconds, they reached the other side safely. As soon as they stopped, she told him to wait for a moment and caught her breath. Looking ahead, she noticed that the path split into two directions and asked which one they were supposed to take. Alan answered calmly that both paths were correct and that each one led to a crystal. She glared at him, clearly irritated, and told him to stop making things complicated. Alan replied that he wouldn't mind splitting up to save time, but he was concerned about her safety. After a brief pause, they decided to stay together, even if she accepted it somewhat reluctantly. In his mind, Alan knew he needed her alive if he wanted the information she had promised. Moving forward, they entered the next challenge, a long corridor filled with sharp, spinning blades. Melissa immediately pointed out how dangerous the area looked and asked what they should do. Alan didn't hesitate. He created a weapon and said the solution was simple. He began firing at the traps, destroying the blades one by one. Watching this, Melissa realized she could also use her magic, and Alan confirmed that skills still worked in this area. With a confident smile, she activated a defensive spell, forming a barrier around them. Together, they moved through the corridor, breaking and blocking every trap in their path until they reached the end. In the final room, they found a massive wall with a crystal positioned at the top. Melissa asked if there were any traps this time, and Alan told her to check it herself. She walked up and touched the surface, only to realize that it was far too smooth and slippery to climb. Frustrated, she suggested that he use his ability. Alan smiled, saying she was finally starting to understand. He couldn't help but brag slightly about how versatile his class was. Melissa told him to stop talking and hurry up, asking if he was planning to use the balloon again. Alan shook his head, saying that would be excessive for something this simple. Then he activated his creation skill once more. In the middle of the dungeon, a strange structure appeared, an elevator. Melissa stared at it, completely confused about what she was looking at. Alan explained briefly that it was a machine used to move up and down, then pressed a button. With a soft mechanical sound, the platform began to rise, carrying both of them smoothly upward toward the crystal. Alan casually explained that the elevator was simply a machine used to move people and goods up and down. Before Melissa could even process it properly, the platform had already reached the top. The two stepped off, grabbed the crystal, and now only one remained before they could advance. Alan immediately suggested moving on, but Melissa told him to wait for a moment before they continued. When they entered the final room, they were met with a vast swamp filled with thick, dangerous poison. Alan warned her that the substance was highly toxic and could easily inflict status effects if they made contact with it. Melissa looked at him and asked what kind of creation he planned to use this time. Instead of answering, Alan simply smiled and activated his skill again. A moment later, a boat appeared in front of them. Melissa blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting something so ordinary. For a second, she muttered to herself that it was unexpectedly simple, and Alan glanced at her, asking if she had said something. She quickly brushed it off, thinking she had expected something more complicated. Alan told her there was no need to overthink it and asked her to get into the boat. Once inside, Melissa looked around and asked about the oars, wondering how they were supposed to move. Alan leaned back slightly with a faint smile and said that this was where teamwork came in. She stared at him in confusion for a moment, then slowly realized what he meant. Her expression turned annoyed as she understood that she would be the one powering the boat with her magic. Complaining under her breath, she began using her wind magic to push them forward, while Alan relaxed completely, resting with his hands behind his head as if he were on a casual trip. After crossing the swamp, they finally reached the last crystal. With all three in hand, the first floor was complete. Melissa admitted that she had thought it would be impossible, yet somehow it had felt surprisingly easy. Alan replied that it was only natural and with a bit of pride added that his crafter class was the strongest. As he turned and told her to move on, Melissa quietly disagreed in her mind. She realized that it wasn't the class that was truly powerful, but Alan himself. Even though they hadn't known each other for long, she was already certain of one thing: he would become a legendary adventurer. A few minutes later, they arrived at the transfer room leading to the next level. Alan explained that placing the 3 crystals on the pedestal would allow them to advance. Melissa commented that he never seemed to get lost and always knew exactly what to do. Alan simply replied that he had staked his entire life on this. Without hesitation, he placed the crystals onto the pedestal. They began to glow, and the system quickly authenticated them. In the next moment, both of them were teleported to the middle floor. The environment changed completely. As they stepped into the new area, Alan explained that the middle floors functioned as a separate instance dungeon, comparing it to something like a matryoshka doll. Melissa didn't understand the reference, and he casually said he would show her one someday after they cleared the castle. They approached the portal that would begin the next challenge, both ready to continue. But just as Alan was about to step forward, Melissa suddenly stopped him. He turned back, confused, wondering what was wrong. With a serious expression, she looked straight at him and challenged him to a fight before they went any further. Before stepping into the next section, Melissa suddenly proposed a small bet, saying it would make things more interesting. Alan looked at her with slight curiosity and asked what she had in mind. With a confident smile, she explained that the middle floors were divided into 2 parts and warned that the first area would be filled with a massive horde of weak monsters. As she lit a flame in her hand, she suggested turning it into a competition to see who could defeat more enemies. Alan crossed his arms and pointed out that the rules clearly favored her, since her class specialized in large-scale area attacks, while his weapons were usually designed for focused damage. Melissa only smirked at that, teasing him by asking if he was afraid of losing. Standing with her hands on her hips, she said she would show him the real value of her power, determined to make him acknowledge her strength. After a brief pause, Alan accepted the challenge, thinking it would at least speed up clearing the floor. The two agreed that whoever lost would pay for an expensive potion. With that settled, they stepped through the blue portal. On the other side, they were greeted by a massive swarm of creatures. Half-pig monsters and goblins filled the arena, their red eyes locked onto the intruders. Both of them grew serious immediately. A system notification appeared, stating that the trial required defeating 1,500 enraged beasts. Melissa didn't hesitate. She began casting immediately, unleashing wind magic that tore through the monsters and reduced many of them to dust. Gathering even more power, she activated a spell that formed a massive dark vortex in the sky, pulling enemies into it and scattering them across the battlefield. As she continued, she confidently showed off the strength of her large-scale attacks. When it was Alan's turn, he extended his hand and gathered a dense blue energy before activating his skill. In an instant, a massive rotary machine gun appeared in his grasp. Taking a firm stance, he focused entirely on the targets ahead and calmly warned the creatures to brace themselves. Then he fired. The weapon roared to life, releasing a relentless stream of bullets and flames. The sheer volume of fire tore through the monsters effortlessly, cutting down multiple enemies at once. The attack power and firing speed were overwhelming, and the creatures fell one after another without any chance to react. Watching this, Melissa was left stunned. Even as Alan maintained his position, he remarked that while the weapon limited his mobility, its clearing capability was unmatched. Refusing to accept defeat, she pushed herself further, channeling even more magic as she rose into the air, surrounded by a powerful aura, determined to close the gap. But after several minutes, the result was clear. The scoreboard appeared, showing that Alan had secured 800 eliminations, winning the competition. Melissa dropped to the ground, completely exhausted, while Alan walked past her and commented that she had simply chosen the wrong opponent. Seeing her frustration, he added that the difference hadn't been that big, trying to lighten the mood. But she remained silent, clearly annoyed at losing in the very field where she should have had the advantage. Looking up at him, she finally understood that Alan wasn't just strong, he was an anomaly. Continuing deeper into the dungeon, they soon reached the next section. Melissa warned that the upcoming fight would be against the floor boss. Alan, focused on their goal, noted that they were getting closer to obtaining the dragon orb. For a moment, Melissa admitted that exploring such a dangerous place had felt surprisingly easy with him around. Alan didn't respond, already preparing himself mentally for what was coming. Standing side by side, they faced forward as a bright blue light filled the area. Melissa warned that the enemies were approaching, and the ground suddenly shook as a massive claw slammed down, sending dust flying everywhere. From within the haze, the boss emerged, a massive purple ogre riding atop a beast resembling a giant lion. A system panel revealed their identities, a level 50 crystal ogre and its mount, a level 50 crystal manticore, both radiating a dangerous aura. Melissa immediately noticed that the two moved in perfect coordination and said they needed to separate them. But Alan disagreed. Instead, he activated his creation skill again. With a confident expression, he summoned a rocket launcher and stated that he would take both of them down at once. Seeing the weapon, Melissa instantly recognized it as the same one that had defeated the previous boss in a single strike, and her eyes lit up with anticipation. As Melissa looked at the weapon, she quickly noticed something off. The attack power displayed was only 16,000, clearly lower than what she had seen before. Alan calmly explained that this was just a normal version, adding that a direct hit would still be enough to finish the fight. He also pointed out that when he used magic stones, the creations became much stronger but would break after a single use, leaving no room for prolonged combat. Before they could say anything more, the two monsters fixed their gaze on them with killing intent. In the next instant, both the ogre and its mount lunged forward at incredible speed, closing the distance rapidly. Alan reacted immediately, ordering Melissa to freeze the entire arena floor. Although caught off guard by the sudden command, she didn't hesitate. Placing her hands on the ground, she released her magic, and a wide layer of ice spread forward at high speed toward the approaching enemies. In Alan's mind, the plan was clear. The manticore was extremely agile, and a direct attack would be easily avoided. So instead, he needed to force it into a position where dodging would no longer be possible. But the beast reacted faster than expected. Just before the ice could reach it, the manticore leaped high into the air, completely avoiding the frozen surface. The sheer height of the jump surprised both Alan and Melissa. Still, Alan showed no concern. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face as he said that the movement was exactly what he had hoped for. Without wings, the creature wouldn't be able to maneuver freely in midair, making it an easy target. Taking aim, he fired. The missile shot upward with precision, heading straight toward the airborne monsters. The ogre, realizing the danger, widened its eyes and reacted instantly. In an unexpected move, it used its own mount as a stepping point, pushing off it to escape while leaving the manticore behind. Melissa and Alan were both momentarily stunned by the decision. The boss had sacrificed its own partner without hesitation. A massive explosion followed as the rocket struck the manticore midair, completely engulfing it. Alan frowned slightly, realizing that such a reaction wasn't something he remembered from the game. But there was no time to think. Using the momentum from its escape, the ogre prepared a counterattack, descending rapidly from above. Alan looked up and immediately understood the danger. The creature was aiming to crush him directly. Melissa panicked and shouted for him to move, but Alan didn't react. He stood completely still, showing no fear or urgency. Seeing that, she grew even more anxious. At his level and without any defensive gear, taking that hit would be fatal. Without thinking, she rushed forward, trying to intercept the attack in his place. But the distance was too great. The ogre came down with its club glowing red, ready to deliver a devastating blow. Melissa stretched out her hand desperately, realizing she wouldn't reach him in time. The attack was only inches away, and Alan remained motionless, standing in the center of the arena. As the ogre descended, Alan remained completely still, his mind already steps ahead. The move of using its own mount as a stepping point had been unexpected, but not enough to catch him off guard. In fact, he had already considered the possibility. A faint yellow glow began to gather at the barrel of his weapon, signaling that something was about to happen. With a slight smile, Alan revealed that everything was unfolding exactly as he had calculated. The moment the weapon finished reloading, he fired again, sending a second missile straight toward the ogre's face. The explosion that followed was even more intense. Melissa instinctively raised her arms, shielding herself from the powerful shockwave as the blast filled the arena. When the smoke finally cleared, Alan let out a quiet breath, relieved to see the result. A system notification appeared, confirming the victory and raising his level to 26. Melissa stared at him in confusion, unable to understand how he had fired again. She was certain he had already used up all his ammunition. Alan explained calmly that unlike fusion-based weapons, this one automatically reloaded over time. He admitted that it had been a close call, since he would have been hit if the reload hadn't completed in time, but he had already accounted for the second shot when forming his plan. With the battle over, he walked forward and picked up the purple crystal dropped by the boss. Then he remarked that only the crystal dragon remained before they could clear the dungeon. Melissa watched him quietly, realizing something important. She had seen many adventurers who relied purely on strength, but she had never met someone who combined calm thinking and confidence like he did. In that moment, she finally understood why someone would want to eliminate him. Soon, they arrived at the massive entrance leading to the upper floors. Melissa stepped forward and tried to push the heavy door open, preparing for the final battle, but Alan stopped her and said the door was just for appearance. She looked at him, confused, and he explained that this floor actually used a teleportation portal, which should have been present there. Since the portal wasn't visible, Alan concluded that someone else was already inside. Melissa's expression tightened as she understood the situation. She asked if another group had already entered to challenge the boss, and Alan confirmed it with a nod. She grew visibly nervous, realizing that if the other group succeeded, all their effort would have been meaningless. Instead of reacting, Alan simply sat down and said that panicking wouldn't change anything. He suggested they use the time to prepare a proper strategy. Then he began explaining the nature of the crystal dragon, revealing that it was an epic-class boss. Melissa was stunned. She knew that epic-class enemies were on a completely different level, possessing unique abilities and overwhelming stats. Alan continued, explaining that the dragon had a devastating attack and, more importantly, a damage cap that prevented it from taking excessive damage in a single hit. Hearing that, Melissa immediately understood the problem. Alan's overwhelming firepower wouldn't work the same way against this enemy. Alan agreed and said that was exactly why they needed a proper plan. He explained that during the fight, waves of weaker monsters would continuously appear and asked her to handle them while he focused entirely on the dragon. She accepted the role but asked about the dragon's strongest attack. Alan told her that when the moment came, he would give a signal, and she just needed to hide immediately. Just then, the blue portal appeared once more. Alan stood up and said that the other group's fight had ended. From the timing, he concluded that they had likely been wiped out, since escaping the boss room was impossible once the fight began. Melissa felt a chill run through her. Even experienced adventurers had failed. But Alan reassured her calmly, saying that as long as they followed the plan, they would win. Taking a deep breath, she nodded and said she would trust him completely. Alan answered with the same certainty, telling her to leave everything to him. As they walked toward the portal, Alan reminded himself that he couldn't fall here, not before becoming the first to reach level 999. Together, they stepped through. On the other side, they entered a vast arena. The scale of the place made it clear that they had reached the upper floor, but what caught Melissa's attention immediately was the ground. It was covered with the bodies of fallen adventurers from the previous group. She froze for a moment, shocked by the scene, but Alan didn't stop. He told her there was no time to hesitate and fixed his gaze forward. From the center of the arena, something began to rise. Slowly, a massive form made entirely of blue crystal emerged. Its presence alone carried an overwhelming pressure. Moments later, a gigantic winged creature floated above the ground, its crystalline body shining with a cold glow. It let out a deep roar as the system confirmed its identity, a level 50 crystal dragon. Melissa felt the weight of its presence immediately, her body tensing under the pressure of an epic-class enemy. But Alan remained steady. He told her not to let the dragon's aura overwhelm her and to stay focused. The final battle had begun. Alan quickly warned that the dragon wasn't the only threat, as multiple monsters had already begun appearing behind it. The two of them stood facing the massive crystal dragon hovering high in the arena, its presence dominating the battlefield. Without hesitation, Alan created a heavy machine gun and told Melissa to focus on the smaller enemies while he handled the boss. He immediately opened fire, unleashing a relentless barrage of bullets toward the dragon. The creature roared as the shots struck its body, the constant stream of attacks forcing it to react. In Alan's mind, the plan was working. The machine gun was ideal against the dragon's damage cap, allowing him to deal consistent damage instead of relying on a single powerful strike. Melissa, while fending off the surrounding monsters with her magic, couldn't help but feel impressed seeing him pressure an epic-class boss like that. Alan remained calm, thinking that even against such an opponent, there was nothing to fear as long as he understood its mechanics. Melissa, gaining confidence, told him to keep pushing while she held off the rest. But then something changed. The machine gun suddenly fell silent. Alan immediately realized the problem. He had run out of ammunition. The moment the firing stopped, the dragon reacted. Lifting its head, it began preparing a counterattack. Alan's eyes widened as he recognized the move instantly. Without wasting a second, he shouted for Melissa to fall back, warning her that the creature's ultimate attack was coming. The dragon opened its mouth, gathering a dense sphere of dark energy before unleashing it in a devastating wave of black flames. The attack surged forward with overwhelming force. Alan dropped to one knee and activated his creation skill again. With a touch to the ground, a massive metal wall rose up in front of them, forming a barrier against the incoming attack. Behind the shield, Melissa stared in shock as the structure appeared out of nowhere. Alan quickly explained that it was a fire-resistant barrier and that the attack wouldn't fully penetrate unless it made direct contact. He added that once his weapon reloaded, they would counterattack immediately. But before that could happen, Melissa shouted that the shield was already starting to crack under the pressure. The force of the dragon's attack was far beyond what they had anticipated. Alan clenched his teeth, realizing that the durability of the barrier wasn't enough to withstand such sustained power. The dragon continued its assault without pause, the dark flames pressing relentlessly against the shield. Cracks spread rapidly across the metal surface. Alan knew he couldn't rely on another barrier. There was no guarantee it would hold either. The pressure kept building, and with a loud, splitting sound, the wall finally shattered into countless fragments. Melissa cried out his name as the protection disappeared. Facing the incoming attack, Alan steadied himself. There was no room for hesitation. He knew he couldn't afford to fall here. Without another thought, he activated his creation skill once again. This time, instead of a weapon, a red fire extinguisher appeared in his hands, completely catching Melissa off guard. She stared at it in confusion and asked what that strange object was supposed to be. Alan answered calmly that it was just a fire extinguisher, the first thing that came to mind to deal with flames. To make it effective, he had fused it with a crystal ogre magic stone. Without hesitating, he rushed forward, wondering if his idea would actually work. Even so, he decided to trust his ability and commit fully. Raising the extinguisher, he released a massive stream of white foam directly into the dragon's attack. The foam shot forward at high speed and collided head-on with the dark flames. Melissa watched in disbelief as the two forces clashed violently. The dragon continued pouring out its devastating breath, but Alan didn't stop, pushing harder as the foam began to counter the flames. The collision created a powerful shockwave that spread across the arena. Alan strained against the force, shouting as he kept spraying. Slowly but surely, the white foam started pushing back, neutralizing the dark flames until the dragon's ultimate attack was completely extinguished. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the dragon seemed surprised. Melissa stood there, unable to speak, trying to understand what she had just witnessed. Alan simply said that it was exactly what the name implied, a tool meant to put out fire. With the danger gone and his weapon reloaded, he stated that it was time to finish the fight. Without delay, he summoned the machine gun again and resumed firing. The bullets tore into the dragon's body, steadily lowering its health. Seeing this, Melissa regained her composure and smiled, realizing their plan was working. The dragon roared and tried to retreat, but the two of them didn't give it any space. Alan told her to ignore the weaker monsters and focus everything on the boss. She agreed immediately, activating her magic and forming multiple red energy circles to amplify their attack. Alan kept firing at full force while Melissa supported him, and together, their combined damage overwhelmed the dragon. Cracks spread across its crystalline body as its health dropped rapidly. With one final barrage, the dragon shattered completely. A system message appeared announcing their victory. Both of them leveled up from the battle. Melissa, catching her breath, complained slightly that Alan had been holding back, but he dismissed it, saying the only thing that mattered was that they had won. He then walked forward and picked up the magic stone left behind by the defeated dragon. Melissa, still focused on their objective, asked about the dragon orb. Alan pointed toward the center of the room, where a large treasure chest had appeared. He explained that the chest always appeared after defeating the boss. Melissa quickly opened it, and inside, the jade dragon orb shone brightly with a red glow. She grabbed it immediately, celebrating that they had successfully cleared the dungeon. But her excitement was cut short. Alan's expression changed completely. His face turned cold as he raised his weapon and pointed it directly at her. Melissa froze, confused by the sudden shift. Alan explained that once the orb was taken, the mission would end and they would be teleported out. With tension filling the room, he reminded her of their agreement and demanded that she tell him who had sent the mercenaries after him. Melissa hesitated for a moment, then agreed to tell him everything, asking him to lower the weapon first. After a brief pause, Alan lowered it slightly. She let out a quiet breath of relief before preparing to speak. The two of them stood facing each other in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation heavy in the air. Then, to Alan's surprise, she admitted that she didn't know exactly who had given the order. His expression darkened instantly. Anger rose as he raised the weapon again, clearly not satisfied with the answer. Melissa quickly tried to calm him, explaining that while she didn't know the exact individual, she did know which organization was behind it and had solid information about them. Hearing that, Alan paused. He thought about her words for a moment, then slowly let out a breath, his tension easing slightly as he decided to hear her out. Alan finally agreed to listen, saying that he would let it go for now as long as the information she gave him was actually useful. Keeping his eyes fixed on her, he asked which organization had ordered his elimination. Melissa hesitated slightly and asked if he thought it was just a clan, but then, with a serious expression, she clarified that it was something far bigger than that. Her tone turned heavier as she revealed that it was the Adventurers Guild itself that wanted him gone. For a moment, Alan said nothing. The revelation hit him hard, leaving him stunned. He couldn't understand it and questioned why, since the Guild's entire purpose was to defeat the Demon King, and he was actively working toward that goal. Melissa explained that things would have been fine if he were just another ordinary adventurer. The problem, however, was that he was. He was growing far too strong. Hearing that, Alan immediately remembered what one of the mercenaries had told him earlier, that he was too strong and that certain powerful figures didn't like that. She continued, saying that if he kept progressing at this rate, he might actually defeat the Demon King, and that was exactly what some people wanted to prevent. Alan frowned and asked why anyone would oppose that. Melissa answered simply that if the Demon King were defeated, peace would follow, and the guild would lose its purpose. Without a war to fight, the Adventurers Guild would eventually be disbanded. Alan understood immediately. It meant that certain individuals were eliminating rising talents to protect their own positions. Melissa confirmed that his conclusion was correct. She explained that this wasn't the entire guild, but a hidden group within it, known as the Demon King's Remnant Faction. Alan then asked who led this faction, already thinking about eliminating the source of the problem. But Melissa shook her head and explained that this was the biggest issue. No one knew who the members were. The group operated in secrecy and avoided openly helping the enemy, which made them difficult to identify. She added that the faction wasn't limited to high-ranking officials. It could include anyone whose position or livelihood depended on the current system, guild members, merchants, tavern owners, or anyone who would lose something if peace came. That meant the enemy could be anywhere. Alan scratched his head slightly, realizing that trying to track them all down would be endless. Melissa then added that based on the methods used this time, the one targeting him was most likely someone within the guild itself. Alan's expression hardened as he stated that he wouldn't forgive anyone who tried to block his path. He then asked about other targets, correcting himself as he clarified that he wanted to know if there were other promising rookies being hunted like him. Melissa looked a bit awkward before admitting that she herself was one of those targets. Alan paused, slightly embarrassed by the situation. She coughed lightly to brush past the moment, then regained her composure. With a serious look, she prepared to explain the countermeasures they would need to deal with their pursuers, while Alan focused on her, ready to hear everything she had to say next. Suddenly, a bright light surrounded everyone inside the dungeon, and in an instant, all the adventurers were teleported outside. Confusion spread through the crowd as they tried to understand what had just happened. One of them looked around in shock, wondering if someone had actually managed to defeat the crystal dragon. At that moment, a glowing blue message began forming in the sky. The system announced that Alan and Melissa had defeated the boss. The crowd froze for a second before reacting with disbelief and excitement. A moment later, the two of them appeared on the ground. Alan calmly said it was time to head back to the city. Melissa immediately asked how they were supposed to get down, reminding him that he couldn't use teleportation. Alan replied that it wasn't a problem and that he would just create a parachute. She looked confused at the idea, but before he could explain further, the surrounding adventurers noticed them. Someone pointed toward Melissa and quickly connected the dots, realizing that the man beside her was Alan. The crowd gathered around, congratulating her for clearing the dungeon with just 2 people. Alan remarked casually that she seemed to be quite famous, and Melissa responded proudly, saying she was a rising star. Excited voices filled the area as people asked her to explain how she managed to conquer such a difficult place. She tried to calm them down with a smile, saying she wasn't the one they should be praising. Then she pointed at Alan and revealed that he was only level 27. The reaction was immediate. No one believed it. To them, someone at that level with a supposedly useless class couldn't possibly achieve something like that. Alan glanced around, noticing that most of the people there were at much higher levels than him. For a moment, he considered using the opportunity to promote his creations, but Melissa stepped in first, saying that their victory was only possible because of him and that the power of his weapons was incredible. She even asked him to demonstrate it. Instead, Alan interrupted her and downplayed everything. He said he was just a level 27 crafter and hadn't done anything special. Then he told everyone that Melissa had defeated the crystal dragon on her own, adding that he had only followed along because of the dungeon mechanics and wouldn't have survived without her. Melissa called his name awkwardly, but then she understood what he was doing. Alan looked away, avoiding attention. In his mind, attracting too much notice would only make it harder to continue leveling up safely. She quickly caught on to his intention. By giving her all the credit, he was keeping himself out of the spotlight, making it harder for his enemies to track him. The crowd accepted the explanation and began praising Melissa instead, admiring her strength and humility. Her face turned bright red as she desperately asked them to stop, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. As the scene settled, the floating crystal island remained high in the sky, distant from the city. Soon after, the focus shifted to the kingdom's capital, a large and lively place filled with activity. Back in the city, Melissa asked Alan what he planned to do next. He answered simply that he would head to an inn. With a serious tone, he explained that he needed to use the magic stones he had gathered to create new items. Melissa said they would part ways for now and joked that it must be difficult for him. Alan replied with a short goodbye, but she stopped him, asking if that was really all he had to say. After a brief pause, she admitted that something had been bothering her. She had received the orb, but in return, she had only given him vague information. Taking a confident stance, she said she didn't like things feeling unfair. Because of that, she promised to investigate the faction targeting him and gather as much information as possible. Alan nodded, saying that any additional information would be useful for his plans. She then suggested that they hunt together again sometime, adding with a playful tone that next time she would be the one carrying him. Alan responded with a small smile, acknowledging her confidence. They said their goodbyes, both telling each other to be careful. As Alan walked away, Melissa stood there for a moment, still processing everything. She couldn't believe she had been the one relying on someone like him. A level 27 crafter, yet far beyond anything she had expected. She formed a small fireball in her hand and wondered if she could reach that level of strength someday by mastering her own abilities. But then her expression suddenly changed. As she walked down the street, she felt something off, a strong, hostile intent in the air. Her instincts sharpened immediately. From a nearby window, a masked figure appeared silently, holding a bow drawn and ready. Melissa's eyes widened as she realized the danger was already upon her. Without any warning, the attacker drew his bow and aimed directly at Alan. Melissa saw it first and immediately shouted his name, her voice filled with urgency. The arrow shot forward at incredible speed, cutting through the air and heading straight for his neck. Alan hadn't even noticed the attack. The projectile came dangerously close, but just before it could strike, a green barrier suddenly appeared and blocked it completely. The arrow shattered on impact, leaving the attacker stunned that his ambush had failed. By the time Melissa looked up toward the rooftops, the enemy had already disappeared. There was no trace left behind. She quickly ran to Alan and asked if he was all right after what had just happened. Alan replied that he was fine, though clearly annoyed. He admitted he hadn't expected to be attacked inside the capital itself and complained that his enemies were becoming desperate, to the point where he couldn't even walk alone anymore. Melissa told him that this was exactly why he needed to learn how to deal with assassins and rogues, offering to teach him. Alan agreed to at least try. She then casually added that she could also act as his bodyguard for a price. Alan refused immediately, saying it sounded expensive and that he would handle things on his own. Melissa looked a bit disappointed, but still told him not to act recklessly and to rely on her if needed. With a light smile, she reminded him that they were now part of the same team. Alan repeated her words quietly, as if thinking about them. When she asked if he had a problem with that, he simply shook his head. Her expression turned serious as she warned him that she wouldn't forgive him if he ended up getting taken out by someone. Alan answered with the same calm confidence, saying he wouldn't fall, not until he reached level 999. Melissa smiled faintly at that response, then waved and said goodbye before turning to leave. As Alan walked away, he paused for a moment and looked back, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He remembered how in the past he had always focused on progressing alone, believing it was easier that way. But now a different thought surfaced. Maybe having someone by his side wasn't such a bad thing. He let out a small sigh, brushing the idea aside for the moment. It wasn't like him to think that way. Right now, there were more important things to deal with, especially the people trying to eliminate him. The next morning, Alan moved through the city streets early when everything was still quiet. He reflected briefly on how he had never expected to be involved in something like this, yet here he was. With a determined look, he stopped in front of a large building, the Grand Clan Association. Standing there, he stared at it in silence, his expression serious as he prepared for whatever came next. The day before, Alan had asked Melissa how he was supposed to deal with attackers constantly targeting him. She had told him plainly that the fastest way to stay safe was to join a clan. At first, he found the suggestion questionable and asked how that would actually help. Melissa began explaining, but Alan cut her off, saying he already understood the basics. What he wanted to know was how it would help him survive. She compared it to animals moving in packs, explaining that strength in numbers created safety. That was why she recommended joining a large, high-ranking clan with strong influence. Hearing that, Alan started thinking about people with power and connections, remembering the guild executives and wondering if they had affiliations with certain clans. Melissa added that clans didn't just provide protection, they were also a major source of information. Now, standing in front of the Grand Clan Association, Alan recalled that conversation. He had come all the way here, but he still needed to figure out how to join the kind of clan he was looking for. As he stood there, a few nearby adventurers recognized him. Some whispered that he didn't belong to any clan yet, while others pointed out that he was the one who had broken the Wolf Mine record so easily. Another mentioned that he had cleared the Crystal Castle with Melissa just the day before. The attention around him slowly began to grow. From a distance, a man in a blue cloak watched quietly, as if he had already grasped the situation. Alan shifted his gaze toward the reception area, noticing that there were separate desks for different types of clans. Each type represented a different focus. Conquest clans specialized in dungeon raids, while others focused on defense, gathering, or subjugation. Among them, Conquest, General, and Subjugation clans seemed to be the most popular. But Alan wasn't interested in what was popular. Before he could move further, a blond man stepped forward and asked if he was looking for a clan. Alan turned to face him, his expression cautious as he asked who he was. The man introduced himself as Max, the leader of a rank B conquest clan called the Gazels, and immediately began praising Alan's abilities as a creator before inviting him to join. Alan listened without reacting, but before he could respond, another man stepped in and told him not to choose a conquest clan. He insisted that a general-type clan would be a better fit and introduced himself as a representative of a rank B clan called the Tigers, promising a warm welcome. Max became visibly irritated by the interruption, and the two quickly began arguing. Alan, watching the situation, casually suggested that they should just take numbered tickets if they were going to line up like that. Their argument only made things worse. The surrounding crowd quickly realized what was happening, that these clan leaders were competing over Alan. Some people questioned how someone at his level could attract so much attention, while others assumed he must be hiding something significant. Soon, more recruiters stepped forward. Even a woman from another high-ranking clan approached and tried to persuade him with appealing offers. The situation became increasingly chaotic. Finally, Alan raised his voice slightly and asked everyone to calm down. Once the noise settled, he turned around and spoke clearly. He said he appreciated all the offers, but there was one condition. He stated that he was only interested in defense-type clans that were rank O or higher. The reaction was immediate. The crowd fell silent in shock at such a specific and demanding requirement. With a faint smile, Alan confirmed that this was exactly what he wanted. In his mind, the reasoning was simple. Defense clans had strong ties with the government, making them ideal for gathering information. They would also provide a solid excuse to distribute his weapons across different regions. On top of that, a high-ranking clan would serve as a powerful backing for everything he planned to do in the future. Looking at the crowd with a calm but firm expression, Alan told anyone who didn't meet those conditions to step aside. His words clearly annoyed many of the clan leaders, who clicked their tongues in frustration at what they saw as arrogance. But despite that, one by one, those who didn't qualify began to leave, the crowd around him thinning rapidly. The young man watched as the crowd dispersed much faster than he had expected, but just as things settled, an armored man stepped forward and calmly stated that he could meet the conditions. Alan turned toward him with a cautious expression and asked who he was. The man introduced himself as Flynn and revealed that he was level 378, adding with a faint smile that he was the master of a defense clan called Sacred Guardian. Hearing that, Alan was genuinely surprised, as it was rare to encounter someone of such a high level on the second floor. Flynn asked if he was certain about joining, explaining that their clan was strict and did not offer any special treatment. Alan recalled Melissa's suggestion about joining on a trial basis to prove himself, and with that in mind, he said he would join only if it was under a trial period. Flynn agreed, stating that compatibility mattered, and then sent the official invitation. A system window appeared in front of Alan, showing the Sacred Guardian clan invite, and without hesitation, he accepted it. The system confirmed his entry, and Flynn extended his hand, welcoming him into the clan. Soon after, Flynn mentioned that he would show him the headquarters so they could go over the details there. The scene shifted to the Sacred Guardian clan's large and well-equipped headquarters, where they sat inside an office. Flynn took a seat and began explaining the rules, asking if Alan understood what a defense-type clan actually did. Alan replied that they were responsible for protecting cities and villages by intercepting enemy forces, and Flynn confirmed that was correct, adding that missions were usually handled in teams of 3 with members of similar levels. Hearing this, Alan frowned slightly and asked if it was possible for him to take on missions alone. Flynn simply smiled and replied that it was not allowed within the clan. That answer immediately frustrated Alan, as he felt that being tied to a group would slow down his leveling progress. Flynn continued, explaining that for now Alan would be assigned to city patrol duties and would only be deployed on missions once he became stronger. Alan remained silent, but inwardly he was already dissatisfied, thinking that this approach would not only slow his growth but also leave him exposed to attackers. When Flynn finished explaining everything and asked if there were any questions, Alan did not respond right away. He knew that simply quitting the clan would not solve his current problems, but at the same time, following these rules would hold him back. Noticing his silence, Flynn asked if something was bothering him. Alan quickly decided that negotiation was his only option. He said that he had no questions, but he did have a request. He explained that he was not interested in patrol duties and wanted to be assigned directly to defense missions. Flynn apologized and replied with a serious expression that the rules applied to everyone and could not be changed. However, Alan responded with a small smile, saying that he understood the rules, which was exactly why he wanted an exception, if he could prove his strength. That caught Flynn's attention, and he asked how Alan intended to prove it. Alan answered calmly that it was simple, then directly challenged him to a duel, stating that if he won, he wanted the exception. Flynn looked at him for a moment before letting out a faint smile, clearly intrigued by the boldness of the proposal. The young man repeated his proposal, calmly stating that if he won the duel, Flynn would have to grant his request. Flynn kept an amused expression, quietly considering the offer for a moment before replying that he appreciated the enthusiasm, but there was a problem. Turning slightly with a faint smile, he explained that he had nothing to gain from such a fight, so accepting it would not be worthwhile. Alan was caught off guard by the refusal and asked why it could not be accepted. Flynn answered simply that without any benefit on his side, there was no reason for him to agree, then suggested that Alan participate in clan activities for a week and come back to discuss it again. Although annoyed, Alan agreed, warning that if this was meant to be a test, he would leave if it did not suit him. He understood that arguing further would not change anything for now. Without dwelling on it, Flynn suddenly shifted the topic and mentioned that they had arrived. With a small smile, he explained that Alan would now meet his new teammates. As the door opened, a voice from inside asked if this was the third member. Alan turned with a suspicious look, trying to assess the people he would be working with. Flynn introduced them as Noki and Hina, both belonging to the Lancer class. Noki greeted him casually, showing his level 55, while Hina followed with a polite smile, revealing her level 40. Alan felt a bit irritated, realizing he would have to form a party with them and question the difference in levels. Flynn simply replied that they were among the weakest members in the clan. Noki looked at Alan carefully and remarked that he seemed weak for someone joining them, wondering if he would even be able to keep up. Hina immediately scolded him, telling him not to be rude, while Flynn added that although Alan's level was low, he had already become quite well known in the city. Noki assumed that meant he had some hidden skill, but Alan casually stated that he was only level 27. Hearing that, Noki was visibly surprised and even commented that being a creator made it worse, since it was considered a useless class. Hina, however, suddenly reacted differently, recognizing the name Alan and recalling that he was the one who had cleared the Crystal Castle with Melissa. Noki looked confused for a moment before realizing who she was referring to, and his expression changed in disbelief. Flynn laughed lightly and remarked that hearing about Alan's achievement made things more interesting. Alan asked if Flynn had not known about it before, and Flynn admitted with a grin that he had only gone to the association out of curiosity after seeing a crowd. Even so, he had decided to recruit him because anyone attracting that much attention had to be talented. Hina became excited and asked if they would really be teaming up with him, but Noki dismissed it, saying that Melissa must have carried the entire run. Alan asked if they knew her, and they confirmed that she was quite famous, which reminded him that her claim of being a rising star had not been exaggerated. Soon after, Flynn suggested that the three of them head out on a hunt so they could understand each other's abilities better. Noki and Hina agreed immediately, both looking forward to it, while Noki jokingly told Alan that this would be his chance to admit how weak he really was. Alan found him irritating, but chose not to argue, instead downplaying himself by saying that Melissa had done all the work in the dungeon while he had only followed along. Noki instantly believed it and with a smug expression declared that he knew it all along, proudly telling Alan to leave everything to his seniors. Alan simply agreed without resistance. After saying goodbye to Flynn, the three of them left together for their first mission in the forest, while Flynn watched them go, thinking to himself that the rookie was a terrible liar and that someone like him could not have achieved that feat at such a low level. Flynn watched them leave and thought to himself that he might not know the method, but an adventurer capable of doing the impossible was definitely not just a leech. Soon, the group arrived at Trent Forest, a hunting ground recommended for level 35 adventurers. Alan glanced around and admitted that he did not really know this place, recalling that even in the game he had avoided it because the rewards were not worth the effort. One of his teammates explained that monsters called Trents lived here, creatures that looked exactly like trees. Hearing that, Alan wondered if detection skills could be used to locate them, but Noki dismissed the concern, telling him not to underestimate the forest while also adding that the Trents themselves were not a real threat to them. At that moment, Alan suddenly sensed something unusual, a faint but dangerous presence, and his expression changed instantly. Without hesitation, he warned them to watch the left side because something with red eyes was approaching. Almost immediately, a level 35 Trent revealed itself and launched a surprise attack. Hina called out in alarm, worried about her partner, but Noki responded confidently that he was fine and ready to fight, urging her to move in with him. The massive wooden creature charged forward, and without fear, the two lancers leapt into the air together. With perfect coordination, they attacked from opposite sides, their spears striking with precision. Alan observed closely, realizing that this was how experienced adventurers fought in real situations. After landing, Noki turned to him and asked what he thought of their teamwork, and Alan casually replied that it was not bad. That response immediately annoyed Noki, who insisted that it was the best, while Hina cut in and told him to stop talking and focus on finishing the fight. The two prepared to deliver the final blow, activating a skill that bound the Trent in glowing threads of light. However, before they could finish it, Alan's expression shifted again as he sensed multiple presences around them. In an instant, dozens of Trents emerged from all directions, surrounding the group completely. Seeing this, Noki turned to Alan and told him that it was his turn now, adding that they would step in if things got out of control. Alan gave a slight smile and replied that it was reassuring, deciding to test things himself. Activating his creation skill, a bright light gathered in his hand, and within seconds, a massive rotary machine gun materialized. The two lancers froze in shock, unable to understand what kind of weapon they were looking at. Alan briefly considered using a thermal scope to identify targets, but then decided it was unnecessary. With a cold expression, he concluded that destroying everything at once would be faster. He pulled the trigger without hesitation. A storm of bullets tore through the forest, cutting down every Trent in sight before they could even react. The relentless barrage left no room for escape, and in mere moments the entire area fell silent. As the smoke cleared, only destruction remained. Alan rested the weapon on his shoulder and turned back toward his teammates, calmly stating that the situation had been handled. Noki praised him loudly, calling it impressive for a rookie, while Hina also acknowledged his performance, but both of them were secretly shaken by the overwhelming power they had just witnessed. Just as they began to move forward again, Alan suddenly stopped. His expression darkened as he sensed something different, something far more dangerous than before. A voice echoed from ahead, calmly stating that it had finally managed to find him. From the shadows of the forest, a man wearing an orange jacket stepped forward, appearing directly in front of Alan. Alan looked at the man in front of him and calmly asked who he was. The stranger's expression immediately twisted in anger, clearly offended that he had not been recognized, and he loudly demanded to know how Alan could forget someone like Lucas, declaring himself powerful and reminding him of the humiliation in the wolf mine. The two lancers stood confused, unable to follow what was happening, while Lucas proudly displayed his new level, boasting that he had reached level 73. Alan recalled that Lucas had only been around level 65 back then and casually remarked that it had only been a week, yet he had gained quite a few levels, thinking to himself that the progress was decent by this world's standards. Lucas, however, was filled with excitement and rage, shouting that all of it had been for the sake of finally defeating Alan. Hearing that, Alan asked how he intended to settle things since they were not inside a dungeon this time. Lucas drew his sword and declared that he would not repeat what happened before, insisting on a proper one-on-one duel. Alan then asked about the others who had been with him earlier, and Lucas, with a cruel smile, revealed that he had already gotten rid of them, calling them useless. Noki immediately reacted, accusing him of being shameless for challenging someone far below his level, but Lucas snapped back angrily, telling him to stay out of it. Alan remained calm, thinking that while anything could happen in this world, a one-on-one fight like this was not something he would recommend. Lucas, however, smirked and claimed that he already knew the secret behind Alan's weapons, insisting that they only worked effectively against monsters and were useless against humans, then mockingly told him to create a sword instead if he wanted a fair fight. Without showing any concern, Alan simply raised his weapon and pulled the trigger. The shot passed so close that it grazed Lucas's ear, leaving a shallow cut. Lucas froze in shock for a moment before letting out a cry of pain, clutching his ear as he realized what had just happened. Alan calmly apologized, saying that the information Lucas had was outdated, adding that it was only a scratch this time and that he would aim properly next time. Fear quickly replaced Lucas's confidence. Still holding his injured ear, he muttered that he would leave for today and retreated from the forest in a hurry. Noki was left stunned by what he had just witnessed, while Hina looked at Alan with shining eyes, openly admiring how easily he had dealt with someone so much stronger. She commented that he was incredibly reliable and far stronger than both of them, admitting that she had always thought creators were weak, but now realized that was not necessarily true. Alan responded casually that it suited him perfectly, then asked her why she had chosen to become a lancer. Before she could answer properly, Noki suddenly panicked, thinking Alan might be getting too close to her. Hina leaned slightly closer to Alan, awkwardly asking if he had a girlfriend, but before the conversation could continue, Noki abruptly interrupted, raising his voice and startling both of them. He told her to pay attention to their surroundings, then quickly called Alan aside, insisting they needed to discuss something important. Hina was left confused as Noki pulled Alan away. Alan questioned why the discussion had to be private, suggesting all three of them should be involved, but Noki admitted that the meeting was just an excuse because he had something personal to say. Alan listened silently as Noki suddenly dropped to his knees and begged him to stay away from Hina, explaining that they had been childhood friends and that his feelings for her went beyond that. With a flushed face, Noki confessed that he was in love with her and saw Alan as a threat. Alan let out a quiet sigh, finding the situation unnecessarily dramatic and not worth his time. Calmly, he replied that he had no interest in romance and even offered to help him. He then suggested creating a situation during the boss fight where Noki could stand out. Noki quickly asked what the plan was, and Alan explained that he would start by fighting alone, pretending to struggle while holding back his strength. At the right moment, Noki would step in and save him, making himself look impressive. He added that the boss they were about to face relied heavily on mobility and could easily be defeated alone, so the plan would work without risk. Overjoyed, Noki immediately hugged Alan in gratitude, only for Alan to tell him to stop right away. With the plan decided, they returned to Hina and continued deeper into the forest. Before long, they reached the area where the boss resided and spotted the massive Trent King, a gigantic tree-like creature with 3 glowing red eyes. Hina stared at it in shock, commenting on its enormous size, then asked what they were going to do. Alan simply told them to stay back, stepping forward as if he was going to handle it himself. Hina leaned slightly toward Alan and said she was counting on his strength, which immediately made Noki uneasy. Without responding much, Alan activated his creation skill, and a bright light gathered around him as an energy cube formed in his hand. In an instant, it reshaped into an assault rifle, its stats briefly appearing as he evaluated it, nodding to himself that he had lowered the power as much as possible, though it should still be enough for the situation. The two lancers watched in shock, while Hina looked impressed by yet another unfamiliar weapon. Alan explained casually that it was a weaker version but easier to control, then rushed forward and began firing at the Trent King. The bullets struck the massive creature, but it barely reacted, as if the attacks meant nothing. Seeing that, Hina grew confused, unable to understand why the attacks were not working this time. Alan continued his act, pretending that he had misconfigured the weapon and was about to be overwhelmed. Taking the opportunity, Noki stepped forward and declared that he would handle it, telling Alan to step back while Hina called out to him in concern. With a confident grin, Noki reassured her that there was nothing to worry about and told her to watch closely. Even so, Hina's expression remained tense as she watched him move. Noki began dodging the Trent King's attacks, showing off his agility, then gathered his strength and charged forward with a loud shout. With a precise strike, he drove his spear into the boss, landing what looked like a powerful hit. Hina's eyes lit up as she praised him, saying he was amazing, while Alan nodded slightly, acknowledging his effort and thinking that although the plan might take some time, it should work. Noki, clearly pleased with himself, brushed it off as something expected of him, and even began taunting the monster, asking if it was nothing more than a large body with no real strength. However, the moment he said that, his expression shifted as he realized too late that he had pushed things too far. The Trent King reacted instantly, striking back with overwhelming force and sending Noki flying with a single blow. Hina cried out in panic as she saw him thrown across the ground. Alan frowned, irritated by how carelessly Noki had handled the situation, wondering if he had been serious about that reckless behavior. With its red eyes glowing more intensely, the Trent King prepared another attack and unleashed a barrage of sharp thorns toward the fallen lancer. Hina stood frozen beside Alan, unable to react, while Noki lay on the ground, shouting in fear as the incoming attack threatened to finish him off. Watching the situation, Alan muttered that this was getting hard to watch and immediately activated his skill. A massive rocket launcher formed in his hands, and without hesitation, he fired straight at the monster. The explosion that followed shook the entire area, destroying everything around them. When the smoke cleared, Noki was still on the ground, coughing heavily, right beside the item the boss had dropped. A system notification appeared as Alan leveled up, and he calmly offered a potion to help Noki recover. Hina, still stunned, grabbed Alan's arm and asked if he had really defeated the Trent King in a single hit, unable to understand how it had ended so quickly. Behind them, however, Noki's expression twisted with frustration. He suddenly shouted at Alan not to interfere, insisting that he had everything under control. Hina immediately turned on him, scolding him for his attitude and telling him he should be grateful instead of complaining after being saved. She called him out without hesitation, leaving him speechless. With a polite smile, she apologized to Alan for Noki's behavior, while Alan simply replied that he understood, adding that Noki had probably just wanted to look good in front of her. Hina then praised Alan, saying that even though he had struggled at first, he had handled everything perfectly in the end. Noki, trying to recover his pride, quickly added that Alan had only succeeded because he had already cornered the boss, and Alan went along with it, saying that the victory belonged to Noki. Even so, Hina looked at Alan with suspicion, clearly not convinced. Taking advantage of the moment, Noki started boasting again, claiming that Alan had only gotten in the way. Hina ignored him completely and instead leaned closer to Alan, quietly calling his name with admiration in her eyes. Before he could react, she suddenly hugged him and said that he was strong, humble, mature, and very cool, even suggesting that they should go out and eat together to get to know each other better. At that moment, Noki looked completely defeated, as if his spirit had left his body. Alan, on the other hand, could only think that the situation had turned into a troublesome distraction. After finishing the hunt, the trio returned to the clan headquarters and met Flynn. With a smile, Flynn asked how the newcomer had performed on his first mission. Hina excitedly explained that Alan had been incredible and had taken down the boss with a single explosion. Alan then added that someone from the Wolf Mine had tried to pick a fight with him during the mission. Flynn immediately recognized the description, asking if it was the level 70 swordsman Lucas, and explained that the man had caused trouble for their clan before, which was why they had already investigated him. He advised Alan that if Lucas approached him again, he should simply use the clan's name, making it clear that they would handle it. Hearing that, Alan realized just how much influence a top-tier clan truly had. Flynn, however, kept a relaxed expression and said he was just glad Alan had returned safely. He then congratulated all three of them on completing the mission successfully, and they acknowledged it. Hina, still full of energy, suggested that the four of them go out for dinner as a welcome celebration, but Flynn declined, saying he still had work to handle. Slightly disappointed, she decided that she and Alan would go instead, grabbing his arm without hesitation, which once again left Noki in shock. Flynn simply reminded them not to stay out too late, as there would be work the next day. The trio paused at that, surprised, and Hina asked if something important had come up. With a faint smile, Flynn revealed that a new mission request had just arrived, and more specifically, that the request had mentioned Alan by name. Alan was surprised to hear that, while Hina immediately praised him, saying it was impressive to be specifically requested on his very first day in the clan. Flynn explained that the request was not a normal defense mission and described it as a special assignment. The client specifically wanted Alan to distribute his weapons among the residents, though Alan corrected him on the name of the weapons. Flynn admitted he had never heard of anything like them and asked if the task was really just to hand them out, and then confirmed that it was exactly what had been requested. He added that the mission would take place in the city of Bayandol. Hearing that name, all three of them recognized it immediately as a frontline city standing against the Demon King. Flynn continued, explaining that this was precisely why Lady Olivia had made the request, wanting the civilians there to be equipped with Alan's creations. He emphasized that it was not a standard mission, and made it clear that Alan was free to refuse if he did not wish to go. Without hesitation, Alan replied that he would accept. In his mind, this was the perfect opportunity, almost a blessing, since distributing weapons would allow him to gain experience much faster. Flynn nodded in understanding and then asked if he could take this as Alan officially joining the clan. Alan agreed casually, saying it was not a problem and that he had almost forgotten it was supposed to be a trial. However, a thought crossed his mind, and he paused, finding it strange that someone still in a trial period would be directly nominated for such a mission. Flynn explained that the client would cover the teleportation costs and reminded him that clan rules required a team of 3. Hearing that, Hina became excited and eagerly invited Alan to explore the city together after the mission. Alan suggested she go with Noki instead, but she immediately refused, saying she only wanted to go with him. He told her to be more considerate and added that he was counting on her for the mission, which only made her more enthusiastic as she grabbed him and started pulling him along. Noki was left behind once again, clearly frustrated, but Alan suddenly stopped before leaving and turned back to ask Flynn something. Flynn listened calmly as Alan asked how the client had known about him joining the clan. Flynn explained that the clan member list was updated in real time, so it was likely that she had seen it there. Alan, however, continued, questioning how a noble from a border city would even recognize him in the first place. Flynn looked at him more seriously and asked if there was any issue with the mission. Alan replied that there was no problem, and that he had only been curious about how a rookie creator like him had caught such attention. Flynn asked directly if he intended to refuse, and Alan simply said no, confirming that he would proceed. With that settled, the trio left to prepare for the mission. As Alan closed the door behind him, his expression turned more serious, leaving Flynn alone in the quiet room. The next day, under a clear sky, the three of them set out for Bayandol. Along the way, Noki asked Alan if something was bothering him. Alan replied that it was nothing, but inwardly he could not ignore the unease building in his mind. Being selected for a mission like this in less than half a day felt far too suspicious, and as the thought lingered, he began to wonder if Flynn himself might somehow be connected to the faction tied to the Demon King. Just then, the trio arrived at the massive walled city of Bayandol to begin their mission. A golden light surrounded them, and in the next moment they were teleported inside the city walls. As they stepped forward, ready to start their task, something immediately felt wrong. The streets were completely empty, the shops were closed, and not a single civilian could be seen. Even the soldiers stationed on the walls looked exhausted, as if they had been fighting without rest. Alan observed everything with a serious expression and quietly concluded that the situation in the city was far worse than expected. Before anyone could say more, a soldier suddenly shouted from above, warning them to watch their backs. The trio turned around in confusion, only to see a massive creature bursting through near the gate. A giant level 55 lizard appeared before them, its presence alone enough to terrify Noki, while Hina stood frozen in shock at the sight of a boss monster reaching this far into the city. One of the soldiers raised his weapon and shouted that the creature was charging, but before they could react properly, the lizard struck, sending the trio flying into the air with a single blow. While still airborne, Alan remained calm and activated his ability. A glowing energy cube formed in his hand, and blue light surrounded him as he prepared his next move. A rocket launcher materialized instantly, and with a composed tone he remarked that attacking the moment they arrived was poor manners. Without hesitation, he fired. The explosion that followed engulfed the area, shaking the ground and filling the air with smoke. Moments later, Alan landed safely, and as the dust cleared, the massive creature was gone. Noki stared at the destruction in disbelief, while Hina could only mutter that the monster had been defeated just like that. One of the soldiers questioned what kind of weapon could eliminate such a creature in a single strike, while Hina praised Alan again. Alan, however, simply dispelled the weapon as if nothing unusual had happened. Before the situation could settle, another guard shouted that the fight was not over. Looking up, they saw several level 40 bird-like monsters circling above the city. Alan realized that reinforcements had arrived, but before he could act, a figure descended from the sky. With a loud laugh, a man riding one of the flying beasts charged forward, swinging an axe with overwhelming force. He tore through the monsters effortlessly, sending their remains crashing down, some of which struck Alan as he stood below. After clearing the sky, the man introduced himself as Gordo, the captain of the Royal Guard of Bayandal, explaining that he had been sent to welcome them on Lady Olivia's orders. Alan immediately noticed that he could not see the man's status, which made him slightly suspicious. Gordo then gestured toward a luxurious carriage nearby and invited the trio to board it. Noki and Hina were visibly surprised, wondering if they were receiving too much special treatment. Gordo explained that the city was in crisis and that expectations for Alan were extremely high, as Lady Olivia believed his weapons could turn the tide of the war. Hearing that, Alan understood the weight of the responsibility placed on him. He stepped toward the carriage and said he would meet those expectations, though internally he was already thinking about something else, wondering where the faction supporting the Demon King might be hiding. Meanwhile, far from the city, inside a quiet guild meeting room, a man sat alone at a large table, reading a report. It detailed how 5 assassins had been defeated by Alan and noted that his clan had already departed for Bayandal. The report also mentioned that the target was still being tracked. The man, known as Executive Zed, complained that the distance made surveillance difficult, then focused on the description of Alan's weapon, an unknown type of firearm. He concluded that Alan, as the only known creator of such weapons, needed to be stopped before becoming a serious threat. At that moment, the door opened and another figure entered, apologizing for being late. The guild master greeted him, calling him the finest artisan in the kingdom. A man in a yellow suit stepped inside, revealed to be Hashi, a renowned creator. However, Zed immediately noticed the girl accompanying him and questioned her presence. She calmly introduced herself as Annette, the blacksmith's daughter, revealing her level as 13 and stating with confidence that her knowledge was comparable to her father's. The guild master accepted her presence without hesitation, saying that if her father trusted her, that was enough. He then asked both of them to step forward as the work needed to begin immediately. Zed placed a weapon on the table and instructed them to analyze it. As the two examined it, both of them were clearly surprised, as the structure and design of the weapon were unlike anything they had ever seen before. Hiroshi picked up the weapon from the table, and as he examined it, the screen revealed its details, identifying it as an assault rifle with a power rating of 55. He studied its structure carefully and noticed that its usage resembled that of a crossbow, which gave him a basic understanding of how it might function. Curious, he decided to test it himself. Raising the weapon, he aimed at a set of armor placed nearby and pulled the trigger. In an instant, multiple shots were fired in rapid succession, tearing through the armor and destroying it completely. The sheer firing speed left Hiroshi stunned, his eyes widening as he processed what he had just witnessed. His companion, equally shocked, remarked that the creator of such a weapon must possess an unbelievable level of skill for it to have that much power. Hiroshi, still staring at the weapon, admitted that even at his current level, creating something like this would be impossible. Hearing that, the executive calmly revealed that the weapon had actually been made by someone who was only level 15 at the time. Both Hiroshi and the young blacksmith girl were left speechless, unable to believe what they had just heard. The guild master confirmed that it was indeed a fact and explained that this was precisely why they had been summoned for this special assignment. He instructed them to analyze the weapon thoroughly and attempt to replicate it, even if their version ended up being inferior. The girl took the weapon into her hands and carefully observed it, noting that the attack power seemed to be influenced heavily by the creator's own ability. She concluded that if Hiroshi were to recreate it, the attack power could increase dramatically, possibly reaching 10 times its current level. The executive nodded with a serious expression, acknowledging her insight, but soon a sinister smile spread across his face. He declared that the effort would undoubtedly be worth it, his eyes gleaming with ambition as he revealed his plan to create an entire army of weapon artisans. As he thought about the original creator, his expression turned colder, deciding that eliminating him would be the simplest solution moving forward. Meanwhile, in Bayandal, the trio finally arrived at the Lord's mansion to meet the one who had requested their help. They were guided into a grand audience hall where a woman sat confidently upon a throne. She welcomed them with a calm smile and introduced herself as Olivia, the ruler of the city. Her presence alone carried authority, and she openly displayed her status as the city's leader. Alan stepped forward and politely expressed his gratitude for the opportunity, though his casual tone earned him a quick scolding from Hina, who reminded him to speak more respectfully. Olivia, however, simply smiled and reassured her that it was not an issue. Alan quietly noted her easygoing nature before getting straight to the point, asking where he should begin distributing the weapons. Before answering, Olivia requested that he demonstrate how the weapon worked and confirm whether it was safe for ordinary people to use. Alan agreed, and a blue energy surrounded him as he activated his ability. Right in front of them, he created a new weapon from nothing, forming an assault rifle in his hands. The sight alone surprised the knights present in the hall, who had never seen anything like it. As Alan began explaining, he mentioned that while there were several variations, the basic operation remained the same. Without hesitation, he suddenly fired at one of the guards. The man cried out in pain, completely caught off guard, while others reacted in shock. Alan casually remarked that he had fired instinctively because it was easy to use, showing no concern. Instead of reacting negatively, Olivia seemed impressed. She observed that with such a weapon, even ordinary citizens could defend themselves, especially if they were positioned safely on the city walls. This could significantly reduce the burden on the soldiers. However, Hina stepped forward with a serious expression and asked why civilians were being involved in the war at all. Olivia's expression shifted slightly as she responded. She explained that while ideally soldiers and defense clans would handle everything, the reality was different. Maintaining those clans came at an enormous cost, one that the kingdom itself did not fully cover. With the Demon King's army attacking every few months, they were forced to stay prepared at all times, and the financial strain had pushed the city to the brink of bankruptcy. Alan quietly explained the situation to Hina in simpler terms, pointing out that they had hired too many people and could no longer sustain the expenses. By using these weapons, they could reduce reliance on costly manpower and stabilize the economy. He added that when something was urgent, it meant it was too important to delay. Hina was impressed by his explanation and praised him, but Alan dismissed it as basic reasoning and urged them to focus on the task. Noki, still trying to keep up, asked what they were discussing, but Alan cut the conversation short and stated that they should begin the mission immediately. Olivia agreed and ordered a distribution point to be set up in the central square. Alan reassured her that the weapons were designed not to harm humans, making them safe for civilians to use. He then handed one of the weapons to Olivia, who accepted it with gratitude, while a guard beside her expressed his reliance on Alan's support. Soon after, the trio was escorted to the central square to begin distributing the weapons among the residents. Back in the audience hall, Olivia examined the weapon more closely and noticed that its attack power now read 95. She turned to her guard and asked for his opinion. The man responded that its performance was extraordinary and that the young creator's ability was truly remarkable. Olivia nodded thoughtfully and remarked that it was no surprise the guild was in such turmoil over someone like Alan. The guard explained that the weapon's power depended heavily on the creator's own stats and base attack. Yet despite that, the young man's level was extremely low, and he wasn't even using any enhancement accessories. Hearing this, Olivia began to wonder if this creator himself might one day become the very weapon capable of defeating the Demon King. The guard, without hesitation, confirmed that such a possibility was more than real, and that alone made him incredibly valuable. Olivia quietly absorbed this information, her expression turning thoughtful as a plan began forming in her mind. With a faint smile, she felt reassured that bringing him to the city had been the right decision. Meanwhile, in the central square of Bayandal, the trio prepared to begin distributing the weapons. Curious civilians gathered around, whispering among themselves as they examined the strange equipment. One man picked up a rocket launcher, clearly doubtful that it was even a real weapon, but the moment its status appeared showing an attack power of 6,750, his expression completely changed. After completing part of the distribution, the trio moved to a tavern to rest and eat. Alan casually sat there eating pizza while simultaneously creating items, which once again impressed his teammates. He explained that this wasn't his first time handing out weapons to others. His partner then asked why he didn't use power-enhancing accessories, pointing out that his creations would become even stronger if he did. Alan admitted that was true, and his current stats of 56 attack and 56 defense appeared, showing how much potential he was holding back. Still, he explained that he preferred defensive equipment because this wasn't just a game anymore, and if he died, there would be no second chance. Their brief moment of rest was suddenly interrupted when a knight burst into the tavern, announcing that the Demon King's army had begun attacking the city. The atmosphere instantly turned tense. While the others were shocked and unsure how to react, Alan remained calm, his expression steady as he prepared to face what was coming. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed across the city as a massive army of dark creatures advanced toward the walls. From above, the scale of the enemy force became clear, their numbers overwhelming and their levels hovering around 50. Civilians and adventurers alike gathered with the newly distributed weapons, ready to defend the city. Some adventurers questioned why civilians were even part of the battle, but their doubts faded when they saw the unusual weapons in their hands. Alan quickly demonstrated how to use a rocket launcher, guiding one of the civilians step by step. The excitement among them grew rapidly as they prepared to fire. When the command was given, rockets, arrows, and spells were unleashed all at once. Missiles streaked across the sky, followed by a massive golden explosion that lit up the battlefield. The impact was devastating, wiping out nearly half of the enemy army in a single coordinated attack. Alan watched silently, his expression serious, as a level-up notification appeared and his level jumped significantly. The knights and adventurers were left stunned. Even the captain broke into a cold sweat at the sheer destructive power displayed. Civilians, now filled with confidence, eagerly asked if they could fire again. Alan instructed them to wait briefly as he reloaded the weapons, then gave the order for another round. With renewed enthusiasm, the civilians fired again, no longer afraid of the Demon King's army. The remaining enemies, though fewer, continued advancing toward the walls. The captain quickly shifted strategy, ordering civilians to retreat while the archers prepared for close-range combat. As the battle continued, it became clear to everyone present that the tide of war had begun to change, all because of one low-level creator who had turned ordinary people into a force capable of standing against an army. Suddenly, the captain raised his armored arm high into the air, the metal gauntlet catching the light as he declared that the battle was over and every enemy had been defeated. A wave of relief spread through the civilians, who began cheering and thanking him, calling him a hero as the fight had ended almost as quickly as it began. Amid the celebration, his partner noticed that Alan remained strangely quiet, his expression far from satisfied. When she asked why he wasn't happy, he replied with mild frustration that he had missed a huge opportunity to level up. She reminded him that he had already reached level 30 and even gained 2 levels at once, but Alan shook his head, explaining that without the level cap, he should have gained at least 10 levels from a battle of that scale. At that moment, she recalled the restriction placed on beginners, the system that prevented adventurers from surpassing level 30 without completing the required trial. Alan let out a quiet sigh, lamenting that such a large-scale battle wouldn't come easily again, and thinking that if this had happened just a few days later, it would have been perfect for him. Before he could dwell further on it, the city's ruler approached along with her guard, her presence instantly drawing attention. With a composed smile, Olivia clapped her hands and congratulated him on his outstanding contribution. Some of the surrounding adventurers whispered among themselves, commenting on her beauty while others openly praised her. She calmly explained that she had originally intended to witness the performance of the weapons firsthand, but the battle had ended before she even had the chance. Then, turning her attention to Alan, she asked whether the weapons distributed to the civilians were different from the ones she had received earlier. Alan explained that he had created area of effect weapons for the defense, wondering if he had made a mistake, but she immediately dismissed the concern, stating that, thanks to his efforts, the city's defense had become far more efficient. Then, without hesitation, she made a shocking announcement. She declared that all contracts with the defense clans in the city would be terminated. The adventurers present were stunned into silence, unable to believe what they had just heard. Olivia continued, offering to triple their compensation as a form of settlement for their contracts being ended, treating it as a business decision rather than an emotional one. Alan's teammates were thrilled, praising him for securing such a significant outcome, but not everyone shared their excitement. One of the displaced adventurers stepped forward in desperation, pleading with her not to abandon the smaller clans who depended on these contracts to survive. Olivia's expression turned cold as she asked what their survival had to do with the city's well-being. Her words struck hard, leaving the group speechless. She explained that if their services were no longer necessary, it was only natural to end their contracts. Some of the city's residents even supported her decision, complaining that maintaining the clans had been a burden on their already struggling lives. The guard went as far as calling the adventurers useless, stating that civilians had been forced to fight because of them. Voices from the crowd began turning hostile, accusing the clans of being nothing more than a drain on resources. With a dismissive wave, Olivia ordered them to leave, offering to cover their teleportation costs as a final gesture, though her tone carried no sympathy. The dismissed adventurers left with bitter expressions, cursing her decision as they departed. Watching the scene unfold, Alan's teammate quietly wondered if they had just taken away someone else's livelihood. Olivia, however, reassured them that there was nothing to worry about, explaining that thanks to Alan's weapons, the people of the city could now live without fear. She encouraged him to take pride in the fact that he had brought smiles and safety to the citizens, then asked him to extend that same hope to other cities still struggling in the war. Encouraged by her words, his teammates eagerly agreed to the new mission, but in the background, one of the dismissed adventurers overheard everything. A look of unease crossed his face as he realized that if these weapons continued to spread, clans like his would become completely obsolete. His unease quickly turned into resentment, and then into anger. In his mind, everything would have been fine if this young creator had never appeared. Meanwhile, Alan decided to return to distributing weapons, focused on preparing for his upcoming trial. But as he moved along the wall, the same adventurer who had been dismissed suddenly called out to him, asking to take a closer look at one of his weapons. Alan found the request odd but turned toward him anyway, holding out the weapon without suspicion. In that instant, the man's expression twisted into a wicked smile. Without warning, he lashed out with a powerful kick, striking Alan with full force. The sudden attack caught him completely off guard, sending his body flying over the edge of the wall. As he began to fall from the towering height, the world seemed to freeze for a moment. Olivia watched the entire scene unfold without reacting, her expression calm and unreadable. The attacker, standing at the edge, looked down with satisfaction, convinced that Alan would not survive such a fall. With a cruel grin, he muttered that, as a mere creator, there was nothing he could do to save himself, and that it would be better this way before those weapons spread any further.